A quiet town erupts when a father's world crumbles. He discovers his wife's affair at a heated gathering, leading to a violent confrontation. Wrongly imprisoned, he watches as his wife plots a ruthless divorce, aiming to take everything. Their son, caught in the chaos, flees with anger and a plan for revenge. This is a tale of betrayal, shattered trust, and a family's dark descent into turmoil. There comes a time in everyone's life when they begin to see the world differently, often because of what they have been through. Many people don't realize how much their life is about to change during this moment. Some might go years without noticing this shift. However, my father helped me learn to pay close attention to the world around me. Because of him, I became good at spotting things that others might miss. Looking back, I see how that time changed my life in a big way. Like many teenagers, I didn't understand until much later how much my parents had protected me while I was growing up. They kept me safe from the harder parts of life. I had no idea that in just a few days my childhood innocence would vanish. My moment of understanding came early in life because of a choice made by a progressive Mexican-American female judge. Seeing things from her point of view helped me realize how some people can be blind to what is in front of them because of their own beliefs. Before that time, I thought society was fair and that everyone would believe the truth when it was told. It was a tough lesson to learn that bias can come from how someone views things. During the 3-day court trial, I learned the hard way that the facts did not matter as much as how those facts were twisted to support a certain idea. If the right person heard the information, anything could happen. It only took someone willing to accept the story as it was told. That became clear to me, whether it was true or not. I saw the real cost of this situation. It made me grow up fast. Suddenly, the lessons my father tried to teach me made sense. Over those 3 days, I listened closely to his advice. He always said that when things get tough, the only person you can really depend on is yourself. Now, I really believe that, especially when it comes to family. What I saw during those 3 days opened my eyes wide and showed me just how true his words were. I grew a lot in those days, feeling like I went from being 16 to 21 in an instant. The judge's decision came after I was forced to watch a long and complicated game that my mother had been playing for the past 2 years. This game was about my father and included my 2 older sisters. They had planted ideas and feelings on purpose to cause trouble, leading to everything that happened. By the time I realized what was truly going on, it was too late. My father thought I was wrong about what I believed was happening. He often said that in everyday life, things go wrong, and small events only add up to a pattern if you think they do. Many conspiracy theories start from thoughts like mine. He then explained how you could look at things differently to see them in a new light. He told me that once you have considered all other options, only then can you be sure of what you have seen. When he finally found out about my mother's affair and her pregnancy with a man she worked with, chaos erupted. After a few drinks, her lover could not keep quiet any longer. He began to believe what I had tried to warn him about, but it was too late for us to change things. At that moment, I couldn't grasp how deeply this affected my father. It took me years of living alone to understand his feelings, especially that moment in the Elks Lodge. He believed the child my mother was having was his, and in the heat of an argument, his heart must have been breaking with each punch he threw. My mother's partner had to deal with strong feelings during that time. It must have been a huge shock for my father, who was excited about becoming a parent again. He thought he would get to experience all the joys of raising a newborn. I believe that at that moment, he couldn't accept what was happening. He was trying to protect my mother's reputation. It really hurt him when my mother had to tell the truth during the court trial. I will never forget my father's face when my mother testified in court that day. The whole trial was tough. The lawyer for the prosecution tried hard to show that my father knew about my mother and her partner. Even though I thought my dad's lawyer did a good job defending him, the judge didn't seem to believe him. My father's lawyer even asked me to speak about what I had talked about with my dad. Since it was a bench trial, the judge made the final decision and found my father guilty. She said he must have known about everything because of what I had shared with him, even though he didn't believe me. It seemed like he was looking for a way to get back at someone. I felt for a long time that telling the truth led to my father's conviction. That night at the Elks Hall, people needed to call the police because a fight broke out. They were worried that my father would seriously hurt the man, who acted like he was better than everyone else. My mother's partner ended up leaving the hall in an ambulance. He had pulled out a knife and challenged my father without knowing my father's background. From the police's point of view, they saw my father's military training as giving him an unfair advantage, so they decided to arrest him. The lawyer who was against my father talked a lot about his military training to make his case sound stronger. In the end, my father got 5 to 10 years in prison for a serious fight. He didn't use any weapons, only his fists. Watching the female judge during the trial and listening to her give the sentence left me feeling upset. I realized that even in court, fairness wasn't always present, even in the best systems. Sometimes the truth can be overlooked because of personal views. It was a tough lesson to learn that the person in charge could be biased because of their own beliefs. The sentence felt really harsh for a first-time offense. 7 to 10 years for aggravated assault seemed very unfair. As the officers put handcuffs on him to take him back to prison, my father looked at me and said, "Always trust your instincts, no matter what others say. I should have listened to you. I love you, son. Watch for the appeal." He then reminded me of a Chinese saying, "A wise man makes his own choices, while a fool just follows the crowd." This showed in the judge's decision. I knew my father felt he had been unfairly treated, and I agreed. His lawyer told me my father's case was given to one of the toughest judges. He thought she might have a strong dislike for men, and had even tried to get her to step down from the case. The lawyer also mentioned that she could be biased because of my father's skin color, since she often handled cases involving minorities. He said he would start the appeal process, but it would take time to know if it would go through. That night, I went home and heard my mother tell my sisters, as they were making dinner, that she was going to start the divorce. It was clear now because my father had left to serve in the military, which gave her more control. In about 6 months, she thought she and her new partner could begin their life together while leaving my father with very little. At that age, I didn't understand the laws in Missouri about divorce and shared property. After dinner, my 2 older sisters tried to help me accept what was happening. They downplayed how serious it was and their part in it. Being the youngest, they thought I wouldn't understand, so they talked to me like I was a little kid. But during our talk, I started to see that people often only notice what they want to notice, even if the truth is different. People generally want to look good no matter what the truth is. They highlight things that hide their faults while being ready to argue. The things they said felt very different from what I saw. They didn't realize how much our talk would impact us as siblings later in life. Their view was mostly one-sided and not what I agreed with at all, but it did help me decide what I wanted to do next. My sisters didn't see that I had been watching them twist everything my father said into an argument against him, so when they asked me what I thought about everything, I simply said, "No comment." You might expect a response to that, but my words seemed to go right over their heads. I knew I was outnumbered and in a tough spot. I learned to keep my thoughts to myself because of what I saw. As I listened to them talk, it seemed like they were trying to explain everything as if it were just a series of accidents that nobody could control. Sometimes they said that their actions were misunderstood. I could see through their excuses and thought their explanations were just lies to reduce their responsibility for what had happened. I felt they were looking for a way to ease their guilt. They didn't know I heard them talk with our mother on a regular basis when our father was away. I would write down what I heard in my own words every night in my room while the memories were still fresh. This started after my sisters confronted our mother about her affair. My daily notes were filled with quotes, dates, and my thoughts on what they said. The first talk between my mother and sisters stood out in my memory because they had faced her about her relationship with her boss. As I listened, I could see how my mother worked to make her daughters feel supportive. I hadn't realized before that being a woman could help someone change another's mind. That night, I decided it was best to move on with my life. I figured I could no longer live in the reality they wanted me to accept. My dad always said that if you can't accept how someone acts, it's often better to just walk away. I had no idea how big this decision would be for me. I took out all the sports equipment from the bag my dad had bought. I kept it hidden under the big bed where I slept. I packed my bag as tightly as I could with clothes, leaving behind some things I had always loved because I just didn't have room for them. At the time, I didn't understand how big of a choice this was, but that simple act changed what I considered important for the rest of my life. After looking through my logbooks from the past 18 months, I wrote a long summary of everything I had seen regarding my mother. I wanted to explain why I was leaving. I left that summary on my unmade bed the next morning. There was no denying what had led me to this moment. In the letter I left, I made it clear that I saw my mother and my sisters as dishonest and untrustworthy. I included the 6 logbooks I had written after breakfast. With everyone out of the house for the day, I went to the bank when it opened and took out most of my savings. I felt thankful that my father had made me work part-time in his store for the last few years. I then went to a different bank nearby and bought a preloaded debit card. Before I left town, I stopped by the county jail to see my father one last time. When I told him my plans, he realized I was serious and that nothing he could say would change my mind. He told me to be careful and said that if I ever needed money or ran into trouble, I could call him. I assured him I had enough cash to last me for a while. He asked if I was going to take the car he bought for me, and I said no because it could be traced. I could see the sadness in his eyes. He nodded and said, "Promise me you'll find a way to keep learning and stay out of trouble." Once I reached the edge of town, I started hitchhiking and never looked back. As summer break was starting, I traveled northwest. When I got to St. Louis, I bought a train ticket to Seattle. I planned it this way on purpose. I wanted to keep my destination a secret. I picked Seattle because of what I had heard in the news. It was seen as a friendly city, and I thought the local authorities wouldn't be looking for a runaway there. Later, I realized I had made a good choice. I found a job as a department manager in the automotive section at a Costco in Bellingham, Washington, and I was finishing my studies online. I had finally earned my general equivalency diploma and felt like my future was bright. It had been 5 years since I left home, and I wasn't thinking about going back because I wanted to treat myself. On my 22nd birthday, I remembered how 2 years earlier, the store manager had offered me a job because his wife had seen me help her when her car broke down. When my supervisor finished his education, he moved on to his dream job. The manager gave me the job offer, asking me to complete my diploma first. Even though I wouldn't get the official title or pay right away, I finished my diploma in 6 months. That Saturday, I was driving the lube shop's truck because I was using it to move my few belongings into my new home. I had just been promoted and moved to a new city to help open a new store. I noticed a car with flashing lights and steam coming from the hood. As I walked towards the driver, I gave her time to decide if I was someone she could trust. Since I looked like a friendly young man, she felt safe enough to let me help. She rolled down her window just enough for us to talk while keeping her doors locked. After she popped the hood, I took a closer look. It took me about 20 minutes after the car cooled down to find the problem. By then, I was covered in dust and dirt. I told her that I was going to do a quick repair on the metal water line that had leaked. This leak made her car overheat. Before I began, I explained exactly what I was going to do. Using duct tape, plastic tubing, 2 metal screws, and a few clamps, I fixed the broken metal hose under the car with tools I had in my truck. I spent about 2 hours using an empty 2-liter soda bottle. I filled it with water from a small creek nearby until her radiator was full. She stepped out just as I finished, and I explained what I had done. I warned her it was only a temporary fix, but it would help her get to her destination if she was careful. I advised her not to use the freeway or drive faster than 50 miles per hour. I also told her to have them replace the hose and flush the radiator before adding new antifreeze. The creek water might have had some dirt in it. The friendly lady and her daughter then asked me who I was and where I worked. When they offered me some money, I kindly refused and suggested they do something nice for someone else instead. They then drove to Costco, where her husband worked in Bellingham. I believe he had his team replace the broken water line after that. They had said what I did was really smart. Even with all their years of experience in cars, they wouldn't have thought of it. Most people would assume it wasn't possible to fix temporarily. I fixed a leak by placing a plastic tube over it. I cut the part of the line that had split and secured it with metal screws. Then, I covered the joined part with duct tape and tightened it using 2 small clamps so it wouldn't move if the pressure got too high. The mechanic mentioned that I must have very quick hands to reach the spot and fix it. He also asked if I had burned myself while making the repair. The lady's husband came to look for me at the quick lube shop where I was working as a mechanic. His concern for me helped me get the store manager. The secretary called me and asked me to go to the manager's office quickly. It sounded urgent, so I hurried over. When I walked in, I found two plainclothes police officers waiting for me. It turns out my mother had reported me as missing after I left home, thinking I had run away. A computer program found my connection to the online college courses I was taking, which helped them locate me. For the past few weeks, the two detectives had been gathering information and had informed the Jackson, Missouri Police Department that they had found me. Through their contacts, they found out why my mother was still worried about me. The officers told me that my mother had already been informed that I was alive and where I was living. They said that since I was now a legal adult, there wasn't much more they could do to help. After a quick but serious talk about my life over the past 5 years, they learned why I had left. They told me that my mother wanted me to call home because there was a serious situation with my father that needed attention. This news brought back memories of what I had left behind. I spent almost an hour in the store manager's office, sharing my story. After hearing everything, he understood why I seemed to walk alone and why I kept my feelings to myself. He asked when I planned to go back to face my past. I told him I would decide once I knew more about the situation. That night, after discussing it with my friends, I decided to call home. It took me about 6 minutes online to find my mother's father's home phone number. He gave me my mother's new number. My sister Wren picked up the phone. She told me our father had died in an accident at work and that I was named in his will. The problem was that nothing could happen until I met with his lawyer. When I asked why, she said that without my agreement, nothing could be finalized, and both the executors and I had to approve it. This seemed strange to me. It reminded me of my last talk with my father. He had said that whether he won his appeal or not, he would arrange things so that he had the final say. At first, I didn't want to go back, but one of my female friends pointed out something important about me that night. She told me that I had been hurt by the women in my life so deeply that I had stopped letting them in. It would take me years to fully understand her words. I didn't agree with what she said. She pointed out that I had never gone out with a girl unless it was in a group. She then asked if I didn't want to get hurt like before. She said I would need to look back at my past to really understand myself. Until I did that, my past would affect everything I did. I didn't say anything back to her because I hadn't thought about it much before, but later, as I drove home, I realized she was right. I noticed that in my relationships with girls, I kept my distance. I often remembered traits that reminded me of my mother and sisters. I didn't know it, but my past was shaping my actions, creating a wall for my own protection. To find peace, I knew I had to return home. Then I found out that he had passed away 7 months ago. That's how I learned I had a half-brother who was almost 5 years old, someone I had never met. I asked her to send me my father's lawyer's contact details. 2 weeks later, the next Sunday, I started my long drive back, 2,200 miles to my childhood home. In the 5 years I had been away, I had changed a lot. I looked a lot like my father, but also had some features from my mother's side. I was now 6 feet 2 inches tall and quite strong. My dark brown hair had a blonde spot on the left side. I had a mustache and goatee similar to my grandfather's, which made me look older. Online, I saw that I could get to Jackson, Missouri in 1 day if I drove straight through. Some people might manage it, but I couldn't. It took me 3 days. During that drive, I learned that to drive long distances, you need to train your body for it. I used that time to think about what I would say to my family, from whom I wanted to distance myself. It also gave me time to face my sadness, which was becoming overwhelming again. Life had pushed me to be a bit of a loner because I found it hard to trust people. I didn't give anyone the benefit of the doubt. I listened to what people said, but was careful not to take everything at face value. I watched closely to learn what kind of person each one was. This helped me understand not only them, but also myself. The few people I let get close to me called me a solitary man because they found it hard to read my feelings. Looking back, I still see the secrets that were hidden. The story that my mother and 2 older sisters were to blame for all my father's troubles felt false. With my adult understanding, I recognized that my dad was like a player in a card game with no chance to win. This made what they did seem colder and more thought out. By the time I crossed into Missouri, I decided that in time, I would find a way to make them answer for what they took from my father. As I drove through the state, I listened to local radio and heard a broadcaster mention that many people felt like me and wanted a way to seek justice for wrongs done to them. I entered Jackson by taking the first exit off the interstate right as the Tuesday evening rush hour from Cape Girardeau began. Most people were heading home to the surrounding areas. I was surprised to see that not much had changed since I left. Growing up, things didn't change much in this part of town since it was not in the center of it all. I rented a room at the motel located at the busy street corner in the shopping area. It was a central spot, almost across from the police station, where two main roads met. The old steam train, which the local history group was trying to fix up, still looked the same. It made me think about how some things never change. The train reminded me that they were having a hard time getting the money needed for the project, as no one seemed to be able to help. Once the motel was part of a big chain, but now it was owned by a private family. They changed the name to the Town Inn and offered a free breakfast for guests who wanted it. Once I got settled, I took a quick shower, washed my face, and trimmed my beard before putting on fresh clothes to head out for a meal. I knew that if the Jackson Police Department was still the same, by the end of my first night in town, they would have run my license plate. They would find out that I was back in town. I guessed that within the next 2 days, a police officer would come to see me. The carnival folks also stayed at this motel when they came to town for our annual fair. They had a reputation, and their car plates often went through the police checks. They had been in trouble before, and a few of their workers had been arrested for having drugs. Over time, it became a usual thing for them to notice if a single man or a couple had checked into that motel. I drove over to see the changes that had happened while I was away, and I was surprised to find a new 5-lane intersection at the end of the off-ramp from the interstate. I stopped at Ruby Tuesdays and ordered their cheeseburger platter along with their all-you-can-eat salad bar. While I was at the salad bar, filling my plate for the second time, I spotted a woman I recognized. She had been a friend of my sister when they were in high school. My first thought was that soon enough my family would find out I was back in town. Back in my teenage years, Nicole Green had been the older girl I admired. Seeing her brought back memories of her in a bright swimsuit as she and my sisters enjoyed the family pool on a hot summer day. From what I could see at her table, she still looked amazing. I remembered how many hours I had spent watching her sunbathe, trying to get the perfect tan while feeling all those youthful feelings. Nicole was a natural blonde, and her kind heart and gentle nature made a lasting impression on me. She had a softness about her that I had never seen in anyone else. My grandmother often said she had a gentle soul and hoped that when Nicole found someone special, they would appreciate her. I couldn't count how many times she stood up for me or stepped in between my sisters and me to keep the peace. There was something down to earth about her that made her different from most girls. Her kind nature was one of the things I found appealing, and I often wondered if she had changed as much as I had over the years. I still thought about how she could be friends with my sisters, who were so different from her, while I ate my meal. I noticed her glancing at me from time to time. I could tell she was curious about me too. I saw her sending a text on her phone. I waited, thinking she would come over to talk to me before I finished my meal. I was right. As she walked up to me, I stood to greet her. Your sister Rin, who is on vacation, confirmed it was you, Daniel, from the picture I sent her. It took her a moment to reply because you've changed so much. I thought it was you, but your height and facial hair made me unsure. I have to say I find your new look quite nice. May I join you for a few minutes? Nicole asked as she reached my booth. Of course, Nicole, I replied. You still look as beautiful as you did the last time I saw you. That made her smile, and when she sat down across from me, it felt like no time had passed at all. From her expressions, I could tell her personality was likely the same. Rin would love to introduce you to her husband if you are in town long enough, she said. But Nicole mentioned that she and her husband are away for a few days. What brings you back, and where are you staying? She asked. Washington State, I answered. I assume you know the family finally found me, and I'm back for a few days, I said. I got called back to start settling my father's estate. No, I didn't know, but I understand why you left, Nicole replied. Your 3-page letter to your mother revealed a lot of truths they would have preferred to keep quiet. They were not happy when some of it was printed in the local paper. This came after a headline a few weeks earlier. It created a small scandal that still follows them today. Honestly, after reading your letter, Robin and I have gone from being best friends to just knowing each other casually. When Nicole said something to me, it really caught my attention. Until that moment, it seemed like she and Robin were always together. My parents and I talked about everything that happened, and we agreed that you hadn't really had a choice in the matter. My parents were impressed by how mature your letter was. We all thought that if some of the truth had come out during your father's trial, he probably wouldn't have been found guilty. Given what you faced, the best thing for you to do was to start building your new life. So, what are you up to now? She asked, curious. I manage the automotive department at a Costco store, and I'm also studying business administration, I explained. Are you married? Nicole asked. I don't think marriage is for me, and I don't believe it ever will be. I suppose I can thank my mother, my sisters, and their choices for that. There was a coldness in my voice as I said this. What I saw them do to my dad has changed how I view relationships. To be honest, I've become a bit cynical about long-term relationships with women. I sometimes think I might stay single forever. After hearing everything since you left, Nicole said, I understand why you feel this way. My parents told me that what you went through would take a long time to heal from because it turned your world upside down. Maybe one day you will meet someone who makes you see things differently. It will take time for you to realize that not all women are like your mother and sisters. I found out from Nicole that my mother did marry the father of my new half-brother and took his last name. People were saying that she was treating him the same way she treated my dad. Now, she went by the name Sarah Irene Perkins. She seemed to have a good bond with our mom's new husband, Samuel Arthur Perkins, who was still working as a dentist in town. I noticed the female friends sitting with Nicole were watching us closely, which I found strange. We talked casually for a few more minutes until she said she needed to return to her group. I felt like she didn't really want to leave, and that made me wonder why. Before she walked away, she complimented me, saying I had grown into a very handsome man. When I checked the time on my phone, I realized we had been talking for over an hour. I paid the bill, drove back to the Jackson City Park, and went for a long walk. As I thought about what I had just learned, I couldn't help but watch her as she walked back to her friends. No matter how she looked, she was truly beautiful to me. I couldn't shake the feeling that when she was around, I felt whole. Nicole had reminded me that our actions can raise questions and leave marks that stay with us for a long time. My mom's behavior toward my dad had spread rumors about her current life, whether they were true or not. She would need to leave the place she had lived all her life. It had been more than 5 years since I had last seen Nicole, and as I lay in the motel bed that night, my mind was filled with thoughts of her and our short meeting. I hoped I had behaved like an adult. The next day, around 1 in the afternoon, I went to the lawyer's office. There, I found out that my dad's farm equipment business had been sold, along with the home where my parents had lived. All his other belongings that he had built up over the years had been looked at, and some were sold. This was to give my mother what the court decided was her part. I was surprised because I didn't know how much my parents had until my mother started the divorce. My father decided to invest his part of the money after the court told them to split it evenly. He put it into tech stocks, and its value grew more than 3 times. With those stocks, he started to buy real estate again, using money from others. Your father was clever. After you talked to him, he began to prepare in case what you told him was true. In the end, he could keep some of his money away from the court. And this also included your mother's share. He told me to set up a new investment company. It was created under a special trust with his name and yours. We made it official in a place where taxes are very low, and he managed it from there. This helped protect everything from U.S. taxes. There is about $300,000 in the bank account. Plus, the stocks the company has were worth just under $2 million 2 weeks ago. The lawyer explained that after the first year, he was moved to a facility with lower security where he could have his own computer. Using his business skills, the investment company grew rapidly. Since it operates through an offshore company that pays no taxes, its growth has been amazing. He also mentioned that the company now owns the farm where your grandfather lives, so you'll need to talk with him about that. There is a list of every building, both commercial and residential, owned by the company. It also includes some other unique properties. With building material costs rising a lot in the past few months, I believe the current value of his physical assets is much lower than what it really is. Just so you know, he decided that your sister would not get anything after everything was revealed. Your father believed that since they chose to support their mother, they should receive what they had worked hard to earn. Everything he had is now yours. Your grandfather is in charge of your father's will, so I suggest you talk to him about it. He was really proud that you understood the true situation, the lawyer said. Before I went into other details, I needed to mention what I saw in the quiet of the motel room. I was amazed by what my father had achieved while he was away. He took the remains of a 20-year marriage and turned it into a very successful business. The way he set it up, I could take the money, pay off the loans on the buildings that made money, and live quite well without needing to invest in anything else if I didn't want to. Seeing how quickly he got back what he had lost from the divorce reminded me of when he first taught me about money. He taught me to see money as a tool that can open many doors when used right. My dad always said that even though we need money for daily life, the key is not to spend it without thinking. Put aside your wants for now. Then use your savings smartly to give yourself a good start in life. To do this, you need to realize that all advertising is designed to get you to spend your hard-earned money. Giving up things you want at the beginning can be hard, but you'll soon find that once you are stable, it's easier to use other people's money to your advantage. With the time he had served, he didn't have anything that cost him money. I could see how this had given him a real edge over others. Not having to spend money on everyday needs helped him grow quickly because he had no extra costs. He had taken his own advice by using the bank's money to buy properties that made money, and those properties were covering their expenses well. I remembered when I first arrived in Washington State with the plan to go into Canada. I knew I had to live as cheaply as possible, so I checked the daily newspapers for a small room to rent. Within 3 days, I found one. 2 days later, I got my first full-time job as a mechanic. It was great because it was close enough to walk to from my home. I stayed in that small, furnished studio for 3 years before moving to an apartment. It was very cheap, even if it wasn't completely legal. No one said anything because they wanted to avoid problems with the city. It gave me a place where I could go about my day without being disturbed. I cooked my meals on a 2-burner stove I bought from a thrift store and did my laundry at a local laundromat. The studio had a small bathroom with a shower but no bathtub. I had a simple phone from Walmart, which helped keep my costs low. I made my own lunches for work and used a thermos filled with unsweetened drink mix so I wouldn't have to buy drinks from a vending machine. In just 2 years, I saved 60% of the $300 I earned each week after taxes. I used those savings as a down payment on the 6-unit building I now owned. My father's advice had been correct. I think part of my motivation to stay off the grid pushed me to live frugally. When the owner of the lube shop promoted me and transferred me to Bellingham, I bought the 6-unit home where I now live. One day, I found an unopened handwritten letter from my father hidden among some papers the lawyer had given me. I found out that while he was in prison, the doctors discovered he had liver cancer. He thought it was caused by the chemicals he was exposed to during his time in the service, but by the time he got tested, it was too late. He knew he didn't have long to live. He made a plan to find a way to get out of life. If he passed away in an accident, his life insurance would pay double. I made a note to check if that money had been claimed. He asked me to let go of my anger, knowing it weighed on me. He wrote that everyone can be good or bad, depending on what happens to them. He wanted me to learn from his mistakes and not let my anger lead me into trouble like he did. He urged me to use what he left behind to handle things the right way. I was thinking about my father's last words when there was a knock at the door. It was the chief of police. He came to help close the case that was still open against me. I remembered him from the court. He always answered my questions. He said, "Daniel, I know you think what happened to your father was unfair, partly because of what you believe your mother and sisters did. What you don't know is that the weekend he died, he had just won his appeal and was about to be let out. The court decided by 4-2 that since he hadn't started the fight, he shouldn't have been convicted. He was just defending himself from a man with a knife." The lawyer who worked for the district attorney didn't stress that fact in his first trial. If they had, things might have been different. But now it was too late. I said, "I'm sorry, but I've heard she's causing trouble again." He looked sad and agreed. "There's not much we can do about it legally." She is not the first woman to cause problems for others to gain what she thinks is an advantage, and she won't be the last. Over and over, we see that these people often don't get what they hoped for and end up in a worse situation. She comes from a family that has a long history of bending the rules because they know just how far they can stretch the law. Behind the scenes, we have been trying for years to catch them doing something wrong, but we haven't had any luck. When I didn't answer, the chief continued. He said they did a background check and saw that I had done well for myself. He warned me not to let my family's past pull me down to their level. He urged me to settle my father's estate and return to my own life, leaving the past behind. Before we parted, I asked, "What do you think about Judge Fiona Roselli?" She is a progressive, second-generation Mexican-American involved in the women's movement. For many years, she raised her children alone because she claims her husband left her. She said he returned to Mexico because he felt out of place here. It took her a few years to get her divorce because of abandonment. In her 20 years as a judge, my father's case was the first one where her decision was changed on appeal. "Is she still around?" I asked. "No, she was appointed to the state appeals court and now lives in the capital," the chief replied. He explained that she had to step away from my father's appeal. I thanked him for his help before he left and began to think about my next steps. My father's last message to me was heavy with meaning and could cause trouble if I used it the wrong way. One of the first things I knew I had to do was look into the judge's personal life. If she really got the divorce because of abandonment, how did she know he had gone back to Mexico? Did she know where he was or what had happened to him? Did their children have any contact with him? I learned from experience that every story has two sides, and you need to hear both to get to the truth. Judge Fiona Roselli had a spotless reputation, which could mean she was honest, or it might be because she needed to hide something. I had worked hard to keep my own reputation clean to stay away from trouble, and I wondered if she was doing the same thing. I wanted to find out what secrets she might be hiding. In the early days, when DNA testing started being used in legal cases, the FBI asked for DNA samples from all unidentified bodies. This way, they could help find missing people. In the past few years, over 20 missing persons cases were solved because of this testing. On Thursday morning, as I drove down the long dirt road to my grandfather's house, I thought about all the times I had stayed in their big home with 8 bedrooms and 3 floors. I spent so much time there growing up that it felt like my second home. I saw my grandfather, a proud and quiet man, driving his tractor toward the house. He still wore his old straw hat to keep the sun off his face, which made me smile. The strange, out-of-state license plates on my new Ford Explorer probably caught his eye. When he turned off the engine and got out, I knew his curiosity would make him come to the house to see what was happening. After I parked my Explorer, I got out just as my grandmother stepped out of the kitchen to see who had arrived unexpectedly. Even though I hadn't seen her in 5 years, she really didn't look much older. I could see the surprise on her face as I walked up to her. The last time I had seen her, we were about the same height. Now, I was much taller than her. She stood still, almost in shock, unable to believe her eyes. "Daniel Thompson, you have a lot to explain," my grandmother said as she rushed over to me. "It's so good to see you're okay," she said, hugging me tightly. Tears of joy fell down her cheeks. Then my grandfather arrived. He said in a stern voice, "You didn't need to run. We might have found a way for you to stay with us. But no, you had to be stubborn, just like your father." For the first few hours, I answered their many questions about my life since I had been gone. They wanted to know everything, from the little things to the big ones. I explained all the choices I made and why. When I told them about my life and what I owned, I could tell they were impressed. My grandparents listened closely as I spoke. From them, I found out that my father had died in a strange accident at the prison where he worked. 2 old dryers had exploded in the laundry room. During our talk, I realized they didn't know he had struggled with cancer. The investigation showed that the accident happened because the machines had failed. I started to think if he had somehow made the machines break down to leave without anyone questioning it. When they learned where I was staying, they insisted on driving me back to town to check out. My grandfather, my favorite, said I was worth more than that place. I would stay with them until I moved on. On the way back to town, my grandfather and I talked quietly about my father's death. He told me, "Daniel, your mother let me read your goodbye letter to her. Your dad really wanted to see it. When he did, he broke down and said he didn't believe his own son." Grandfather continued, "He wanted you to know how proud he was of you for how you handled everything." He reassured me that I had the strength to get through this. When I didn't answer, my grandfather looked closely at me and said, "I can see that same determination in your face that I saw in your father. What will you do when I gather all the information I need?" I told him, "I'm going to file a lawsuit against everyone involved. It might take years." Grandfather replied, "But in the end, it might not be worth it." I said, "I hope not." "Why do you say that?" He continued, "It doesn't make sense to wait. The longer it takes, the more it will cost and hurt your mother and sisters. Knowing something bad could happen because of what someone did before will make every small problem feel huge. You don't have to get angry to seek justice." I noticed my grandfather smile before he said, "That's a smart plan. Using the law against them could surprise them a lot. Their partners will have to deal with the fear that all their efforts may be pointless. No one can live with that for long. I think I see a few marriages ending already." "Who will you name in the lawsuit?" he asked. I replied, "The judge, the state, the police department, the district attorney, my mother, her new husband, and my 2 sisters. The money will come from my dad's estate," I said. "If I can get my dad's lawyer to take the case, he will explain that the lawsuit was filed because the estate can't be settled until a decision is made." "That will be tough to prove," he replied. "It's the situations that connect everything," I explained. "If certain things hadn't happened, none of this would be happening either. That's why it has to be seen as both together and apart. You'll need the court transcripts and the divorce papers to start," he said. "But that might not be enough. When we get back to the farm," I added, "you can look at the daily logs I kept from that time. I brought those with me just in case I needed the information. They go into a lot of detail about what I saw and heard from day one. Using their own words against them is what will cause their problems. Your dad kept logs about his thoughts and plans during his business dealings. My grandfather told me this helped him remember every detail and saved him money sometimes." "Do you know where those logs are?" I asked. "There might be pieces of his personal life that could help with my case. We stored most of his things in the basement before he went to prison," he said, "along with the items we took from his jail cell. It legally belongs to you. I'll show you where it is when we get home. I will also need to hire some investigators to look into the judge's background." I mentioned that my dad's lawyer thought something was going on in her personal life that made her dislike men. "If we can prove that, it might be the key to our case in the end." "Why do you think that?" my grandfather asked. "The divorce doesn't make sense," I explained. "When you piece together what has been said, it all doesn't add up. I did my best to stay low-key and build a good name for myself. She was like me in this way, which makes me think she has something to hide. For instance, how did she get a divorce claiming abandonment if she knew he had gone back to Mexico? You can only claim abandonment if there has been no word from the spouse for a long time." Within an hour, we returned to the farm after my grandmother showed me the bedroom I would use. I quickly unpacked and took out my logbooks for her husband to read. It took him about 4 hours. During that time, my grandma and I started preparing the first homemade meal I was going to have in years. This was a moment that brought us closer, reminding us of old times. While we worked, my grandmother shared the latest news about all her kids, their partners, and families. She also decided to plan a family barbecue on Sunday to welcome me back. We were still talking about everyday things when he came back into the kitchen. "Daniel," my grandfather said, "the dates, the details, and the conversations tell a troubling story. I never thought 3 women could be so tricky, but your notes show a clear pattern. Clara, what I read confirms that I was right about Daniel's mother's actions back then. Daniel's logbooks revealed she was trying to push our son away from the marriage by making things worse. At that time, our son was confused and couldn't see the whole truth. Their words and actions clearly showed they were doing this on purpose." After dinner, my grandfather took me downstairs to show me my father's belongings. It took us a good while to go through the packed boxes. Among all the things was the computer he had used while in prison. There were many items I wanted to keep, some that my grandfather wanted, and the notebooks filled with notes from the time we were searching until his last days. I stayed up most of the night reading what he had written, mixing it with what I already knew. As I read, I could connect his thoughts to what was happening then. By looking at both sides, I realized that combining what I had recorded with his notes created a clear picture of that time. The events, when lined up in order, showed his true intentions very clearly. That was when I found his computer password and the details for his Bitcoin account, which were never mentioned during the divorce. Using my phone, I accessed the account and saw that it listed both his name and mine as owners. I thought, well done, Dad. It seemed he had known Mom would make a mistake. In the end, she got less than 2% of his assets. He had started investing early on with a steady $100 each month. Over the years, he had put in about $16,000. Now, it was worth millions. I was surprised he had done this because my father often worried that a big disaster would destroy the electrical grid and wipe out everything tied to it. The next day, I began to turn our investments into cash. On Friday, I set up my father's computer on the basement floor and used the password I found in his notebooks to log in. That was when things started to get really interesting. It seemed my father had followed my worries and hired a private investigation company to look into things. He received their report after he paid their fee, which he could do once he had access to a computer. Because of this, I learned a lot that I didn't know before. It helped me understand what my mother was up to and showed what I now thought was her plan from the very beginning to handle a legal issue. I realized I needed to move back to the area. I had to stay alert if I wanted to share certain information at just the right moment. This way, I could keep building pressure on a few people when they least expected it. I called to my grandfather and asked him to come down to check what I had discovered. When he came down and saw where the computer was, he laughed and said that at my age, he might not be able to get up again if he went down there. "Let's ask your grandmother where we could put it," he suggested. We found her in the kitchen, making a special lunch treat for me. She was rolling out dough for her homemade cheddar biscuits, which she always served with red gravy. Growing up, they were one of the meals I loved and asked for a lot when I visited. I guess she heard us because when we entered the room, she asked if it was for a permanent place or just temporary. "Permanent," I said, if both of them were okay with me moving back to the farm. Just the look on their faces told me everything. I knew it was possible that they had thought about this. My grandfather said, "I can talk to your uncles this weekend to see how soon we can get it ready. Then for now, I will rearrange some things in my sewing room. My grandma said we could make space for a small desk until everything else is finished." My grandfather asked me if I had thought about what job I wanted to do. Thanks to my dad, I now own a large piece of land at the fork where the second exit leads into Jackson from the interstate. I replied, "I think Dad saw how much that area could grow on the West Coast. There have been many changes, like gas stations with convenience stores that have added fast food places. I think White Castle might want to be part of that. I'm going to look into it, and next year I'll start learning from Grandpa how to run a farm full-time." My grandfather's eyes filled with tears, and he struggled to find words when he said, "Your dad always believed you were meant to be close to the land. That's why he bought it from us. He would be so proud to see you return as a farmer." I replied, "For now, it's best to keep our plans quiet. The longer people don't know, the longer those who need to be kept in the dark won't know about the lawsuit we're preparing." My dad had an accidental death insurance policy. As far as I know, no one has collected it yet. I plan to write a detailed summary of the case. I want to see if the recovery team will join us. Grandpa stood quietly for a moment. I could tell he was trying to understand my thoughts. After a bit, he spoke. "It's a smart plan. The estate and the insurance company will make it look like a big business just fighting the government. Your sisters and Mom will feel like victims in this situation because of their connection to it. They won't hurry to settle. Your grandma said, and the news would come out slowly, showing the government that they were getting stronger in their case. That would let you move on with your life as if you had no idea about it at all," he added. After dinner, I will explain how I want to change the third floor. I said we need to give everyone a good reason for the changes. "That's easy," my grandfather said. "I'll just say we convinced you to come back home as soon as you set things up on the West Coast. If they ask why, I will say that, as the person in charge of your father's estate, I want you here until everything is settled. Wouldn't that make things hard for you with my sisters and Mom?" I asked Braden. "We haven't spoken to any of them since we read your letter," my grandmother said. "Your father and I decided that they have acted in ways that show they don't want to be family anymore. They didn't need to do what they did just to get your mother's divorce. We don't understand why they acted that way, and I guess we never will." My grandparents noticed the big smile on my face as I listened to my grandmother. When I left 5 years ago, I said it was because I couldn't accept what they had done. In my heart, I had already given up on them. "I didn't know you all felt the same way. If anyone asks, we will say that Dad planned everything for the case, and he wanted to make sure it would still go on if anything happened to him. If there are any questions from them," Grandma said, "we need to speak together." "That's easy," I replied. "We will say that until the estate is settled, it's best to stay out of it. If someone else asks, we should just say, no comment." "Why think that way?" my grandfather asked. "If you were checking references for a job I might get, and they said no comment." "What would that mean?" I wondered. "It could mean there is something wrong with your character, or that something serious happened that made them unwilling to share their thoughts." He replied with a smile, which made it clear that I should keep my distance from you. It was clever because neither your mother nor your sisters would catch on to our real conversation. Driving home gave me time to think about everything that had happened. I realized that my dad was in a tough spot. If I can't turn the tables on them like they did to my father, they won't see it coming until it's too late, I thought. I believe that going bankrupt won't free them from the court's decision. It's a good thing we haven't shared any details about your father's will. My grandfather said your sisters will think that any money they have to pay will come from their share of the estate. Many from my grandfather's side of the family came for the barbecue on Sunday when they heard I was visiting. The last to arrive was my older cousin with his date, who I knew well. Nicole Press wore some cute blue jean shorts and a loose tank top. We all knew the pond would be a great place to cool off from the heat. She had her hair tied back in a ponytail. More than a few people noticed me looking, including Nicole. The way she looked reminded me of a picture from a storybook. I thought back to those summer days when she relaxed by our pool in a white swimsuit that left little to the imagination. To most guys, she would be considered very attractive. But to me, she was even more special. I wished her date and I could ride in the car together with her between us. Like many girls in the South, she didn't wear much because of the heat. I spent the day telling everyone about where I lived, what I was up to, and how great it was to be back home. I took pictures with my phone's zoom feature. I had managed to take a few pictures of Nicole without anyone seeing me. My granddad and I did most of the cooking outside on the barbecue and flat grill, using the fresh ingredients that Grandma had gathered. Most of the food was grown in her big garden and picked just that morning. Both Nicole and Grandma enjoyed watching me chop the vegetables for the soft-shell tacos and burritos I was making. Later, I found out that Grandma and Nicole had a long chat about how much I had changed in the last 5 years. Nicole had told Grandma that she thought I had grown into a good-looking young man. Grandma replied that she had felt the same way about her husband when they were young, and she still did. While Granddad made burgers from pulled pork and ground beef, I continued to prepare the tacos and burritos. Everyone was busy eating, and I didn't notice how much Nicole was paying attention to me. Eventually, Granddad stood up and whistled to grab everyone's attention. "We need to fix up the 3rd floor of the house soon," he said. "I'm looking for people who can help us." Raymond asked, "Why?" My father's oldest brother, who is managing Clarence's estate, said, "I've asked Daniel, as the main beneficiary, to come home until everything is sorted out." My son's will said that a project he started had to be finished before everything could be settled. We talked for a few hours to agree on what to do. That's when I noticed how focused Nicole was on what my granddad was saying. "Daniel has decided to move back home because I've agreed to teach him how to manage the farm starting next year. Once again, it would be a full-time job. As the future owner of the property, once the estate is settled, Daniel believes we should update the farmhouse to meet current standards. The 3rd floor will soon be ready for my wife and me while we work on fixing up the 2nd floor. We need to finish both soon since Daniel will be moving back as soon as he settles in on the West Coast. My grandfather has 3 sons and 2 daughters still around. All the husbands said they would help. Uncle George mentioned that Daniel already knows the basics. As a kid, he worked hard with us when we needed him. With the price of beef rising these days, he could make a good living from it. I noticed Nicole smiling and wondered about her grandfather, who was Cajun and had come into some money when he passed away. He split his estate between his two sons, and part of her extended family runs one of the biggest greenhouses in the state. Her father is a respected surgeon, and her mother is a trained physiotherapist. Nicole's date for the day joined in on the talk about the new family project. I decided to help my grandmother by cleaning up the wraparound porch. I gathered the paper plates and cups to add to the burn pile. Nicole came over to help me and quietly asked for my phone number. Before I gave it to her, I wanted to know about her relationship with my cousin, but she didn't answer. I picked up 4 bags of paper trash and headed toward the burn pile, which was a few hundred feet behind the barn. Nicole quietly took 2 bags and followed me. Once we were behind the barn, she said, "Now that we are alone, I can explain. Eric is gay but hasn't told anyone because he worries about how the family will react to it. I help him keep up appearances since I'm not in a serious relationship. We have been friends since we were kids and we would do anything for each other," Nicole said. I smiled and replied, "You know, I had a crush on you for a long time." As I handed her my phone, I felt a sense of connection. "Set your contact information on my phone and send a text to yourself. Your sisters teased me about that for years, even though you're only 3 years younger," Nicole said with a smile. "Back in middle school, I knew I would have been laughed at if I had shown my feelings for you to anyone. I wonder if I can change how you see women in general. I love a good challenge, and so do you. So why did you really move back?" I mentioned a lawsuit for wrongful death against those who got in the way of my father's life. I thought of it while driving back. My granddad and I planned to use the estate to hide our involvement. I always thought you were more grown up than others your age. Your way of dealing with this shows that. Your grandmother is proud of you and thinks you have learned to be comfortable with who you are. I believed it was you, but the differences in your height and facial hair made me doubt for a moment," Nicole said. "When you grew up, you really grew up." I told my friends at the table that I had found my next boyfriend after our last talk. I can't wait to prove to them I was right. Nicole noticed the smile on my face and leaned closer to me. I leaned in too. Without even thinking, we shared our first kiss. That led to a few more kisses before we realized we had been away too long. We both had to fight the urge to hold hands, even though she had come as my cousin's date. Back then, she always seemed taller than me. Now, we were just a couple of inches apart, with me being a little taller. On the way back to the family, I walked slowly with Nicole and talked about how we would handle things going forward. I also shared how I felt about my mother and my sisters. She agreed that the way my grandfather and I were planning things would help us avoid a lot of arguments with the rest of the family. As we walked, Eric noticed us and came over. I went to grab a cold drink first. He said, "Daniel, let me get a drink, and then let's check out the 3rd floor." Grandpa had made me in charge of the place. He wanted me to know everything that was going on. When we got to the 3rd floor where I was staying, Eric got serious. He said, "Just so you know, Nicole and I are only friends. If you want to start something with her, the family won't mind." I asked, "Really? Why not?" He explained, "Half of them think that once we sort out our lives, we'll get married. Nicole and I have had a complicated friendship for years. For personal reasons, we will only be friends." I handed him my phone and asked him to share his number. "Nicole and I are already getting close," I said. "It seems like we have liked each other for a long time. Now that we're adults, it feels different." "Did she tell you?" Eric asked, looking pleased. "I care about her, so make sure you don't hurt her or take advantage of her until you know what you want." "If you hurt her, you'll regret it," I warned. I added, "I'm not like my mom, and I never will be." Eric smiled in relief and said, "I think you've made yourself clear." Nicole was waiting for us as soon as we stepped out of the house. You could tell she was a bit worried about us talking alone. It was kind of funny because we both said, "Don't worry, everything's fine." The 3 of us ended up sitting on the back porch with Nicole between us, having a nice chat about life. Anyone looking at us would think we were having a great conversation. But what they didn't know was that we were all in on a little secret. We were planning how to explain our friendship to the family when I got back. We agreed that until Nicole and I got serious, we would be seen as just close friends. We thought we were clever, but we weren't really fooling anyone. After everyone else left, I was having tea with my grandma. Grandpa had already gone to bed. "Daniel," she said, "I don't know if you know the whole story about Eric and Nicole, but if they are a couple, then your grandpa isn't my husband." My grandma explained that Eric has been gay for a long time and that Nicole couldn't take her eyes off of you all day. She told me Eric is scared to tell the family. Out of friendship, Nicole helps him keep it a secret for now. But she knows that it won't last if she starts dating someone seriously. They have been friends since they were kids. "But how did you know my brother in California is gay?" I asked her. She replied that growing up with him taught her a lot about how people hide their feelings about who they love. She shared that even now, when he visits, he still hides it. "That's why I always told him I love him no matter what," she said. "Until he accepts who he is, he won't find peace inside himself." You should know that Eric is okay with Nicole and me starting a relationship now that I've moved back. I mentioned before that I grew up watching her with my sister. I think she knew I liked her, but I didn't realize she liked me too. I need to be careful. Nicole and Ren were very close friends. Grandma had noticed their friendship before the family secrets came out. "I know," I answered. On my first night back, I saw her at a local restaurant. She told me that she and Ren were no longer best friends. Our conversation was all about how there was now a big gap between them. It seemed whatever Ren said didn't help fix things between them. "Do you think she was being honest with you?" Grandma asked. She was the one who told me Eric is gay, and she made sure to share it privately. I thought about Grandma's question for a moment before answering. At the same time, Nicole mentioned she had told her friends that I was going to be her next boyfriend. Grandma smiled and said, "Another good thing is that she's not after your money because her family is already doing well." I don't think Grandma realized how powerful her words were. With my family's history, we all knew that money affected my mom and sister's actions. Grandma had, in a way, given me the freedom to trust Nicole. After breakfast on Monday morning, I set up the computer in the sewing room. I started organizing the events from my dad's logbooks and my own notes day by day. I tried to work as quickly as I could because I'd have to leave by Thursday or Friday. Sometimes I had to pause and think about the things we both noticed, shaking my head because looking back made me see just how complicated they tried to make everything. Seeing everything laid out in front of me made it clear. The legal experts would have a hard time arguing against it because it showed how one event led to another. Plus, the report from the investigators confirmed what we had seen during a morning break. While I waited for fresh coffee to brew, I called my dad's lawyer to set up a meeting for Wednesday at 2. After that, I called the investigators my dad had hired and made an appointment for Friday morning at 10. At 4, Nicole called. After a short chat, we decided to go out for dinner at Boethius, a small restaurant known for its great Irish food. Since she worked until 5 as an insurance broker, she asked me to pick her up at her parents' house at 7. Before I left to get her, Grandma gave me a set of keys to the farmhouse. "Enjoy your dinner and be open to learning new things about each other," she said. "Remember, it's been 5 years since you saw each other every day. Things have changed during that time. You've both grown up a lot. Be honest with yourself and let those changes show. Take your time to learn about each other and be willing to accept those new differences." I knew Nicole still lived with her parents, so I expected them to ask a lot of questions. But when I knocked on their door, I was surprised that they weren't home. Nicole's younger brother, who was about my age, answered the door. "Hi, you must be Daniel," he said. "Nicole will be down in a minute. I'm Hunter, by the way. You don't look like a living legend." "Nope, not much older than you," I replied. "I've been on my own for a few years now, which helped me grow up a bit faster. You must be special because you are all my sister has talked about since you came back home for a visit. Hunter said this last night when he found out you were moving back." She stayed up half the night because of her excitement. Before I could say anything, Nicole came down the stairs. She said, "Daniel, my brother likes to make things sound bigger, so take what he says lightly." The look on Nicole's face made me think otherwise as she walked by him. She whispered, "Told ya," as we drove to the restaurant. I found out more about Nicole and Ren's story, which was quite something. Nicole called Ren's husband her sugar daddy, meaning he was a rich older man. They had been happily married without kids until Ren caught his eye. She even said she was already expecting their first child. When I asked how long they had been married, Nicole said about 3 months. Was it a quick wedding because she's pregnant? I asked. We won't know for sure until after the baby comes, Nicole replied. I then wondered, how long do you think their relationship will last before she leaves him? If she keeps her promise, she'll wait until she has at least 2 kids to get money from him for a long time, Nicole answered confidently. That's when I found out your mom had talked about doing the same to her new husband. Your dad had to pay for all 3 of you until you turned 19. I didn't know that, I said. That makes what he did even more impressive. So your mom couldn't leave him broke like she said she would, Nicole replied. It's a 50-50 estate, I added. He started to rebuild by putting money into technology and getting into the cryptocurrency market, where he made most of his money. Once he had a computer, he began using his savings to buy rental properties. When everything is settled, I'll be able to sell them and live comfortably if I choose. One of the properties is near the second exit off the highway, so I'm going to look into what it would cost to open a gas station and convenience store there. That sounds good. When I tell my parents this, it should ease their worries that you might be interested in me only because of my family's money, Nicole said with a laugh. Even better, we can tell them that we both agreed to a prenuptial agreement to keep our money safe if things get serious. I said if they ask why, tell them that I own the farm where my grandfather lives and about 40 other rental properties. Another good thing is that when my great-grandfather sold the land to build the highway, they promised to build us an entrance and exit when we asked. Nicole looked at me, amazed, and said that 250 acres of land is right next to the highway. It's not if, but when it will be very valuable. That is quite an inheritance. I see it as a safety net for when I get older. I said that right now, the back part is still full of trees. It gives me a natural space for privacy. My grandfather and I used to go hunting during the season to get a deer for food in the winter. He taught me how to use a crossbow. If you're getting all of this, I have to ask, what did he leave your 2 sisters? Nicole asked. Nothing, I replied. Dad always believed in being accountable for your actions. Since they chose to side with our mother, which led to him going to jail, he thought they should face the results of their choices. He's right, Nicole said. Too bad we don't practice that in our society. Many people think they can just move on and forgive others easily. Most don't see the value of the chances they get and keep repeating their mistakes. They believe they can escape the consequences if they get caught. When we arrived at the restaurant and bar, Nicole chose to get out from the driver's side since she had been sitting right next to me. We walked into the restaurant hand in hand and sat down across from each other. Nicole mentioned that a friend of hers worked there, and if she was on duty, she would spot us together. I asked if it was important. She said no, but it did show that I was right when the waitress came over to our table, smiling brightly. It turned out to be one of Nicole's friends. I ordered a Guinness stout, and Nicole ordered a glass of red wine. When the server came back, I ordered the steak pie while Nicole picked the shepherd's pie, and we asked for a double serving of their cheddar biscuits. About halfway through our first drink, my sister Sparrow walked in with some friends. Wren, Sparrow, and I were born within 48 months of each other. Wren was 2 years older than Nicole, while Sparrow was just 4 months older. Nicole spotted her immediately, but I didn't, as I was lost in the beauty of Nicole's eyes. When Sparrow started walking toward our table, the atmosphere shifted. Nicole pointed out that she was heading our way. It's been a few months since we last saw each other, my sister said. I thought I'd come over and say hi before dinner is served. The 2 of them chatted for a few minutes, sharing bits about their lives. I was surprised when my sister didn't seem to recognize me at first. It took a couple of glances from Sparrow before she asked Nicole who her friend was. Nicole, she said, I'm sorry for being rude. I should have introduced you to the man who is going to be my steady boyfriend once he returns to take over his grandfather's farm. With that, I stood up, reached out my hand, and looked right at Sparrow. It's been a while. You still look good, sis. The expression on Sparrow's face said a lot. She seemed surprised, trying to find the words. I could tell my height was shocking her because I now stood taller than her. Sparrow finally said, I wouldn't have recognized you, Daniel. You've changed a lot. Maybe it's the beard that threw me off. Later, Nicole would laugh about the look on my sister's face when she heard my voice, clearly surprised that I was back in town. I wondered if that meant the closeness my mom and sisters had back then was gone, because I thought Wren would have told them I was here. I invited them to join my future girlfriend and me, knowing I wouldn't share details about our relationship. It was a good chance to catch up on each other's lives. Without saying anything, Sparrow turned and walked back to her table. After talking to her server, she and her friends came over with drinks. I moved to sit next to Nicole. Once seated, we made introductions. Sparrow's friends asked why she didn't know I was in town, and I was surprised by her answer. 7 years ago, Daniel and I got mixed up in a game that changed 5 lives, she said openly. She mentioned Ren was involved, and I naturally followed my older sister. It drove my younger brother away. At the time, we didn't realize how serious it would be. It ended up breaking apart our family. I haven't seen my brother in over 5 years, and I hardly recognized him because he looks different now. It would be interesting to know what he thinks about those past times. Nicole held my hand to show her support while I spoke. We are all still healing from what happened, and we have not found closure yet. Right now, I don't have much to say. From this experience, I learned to rely on myself and to be true to who I am. It has changed me. It's clear that both Sparrow and I don't feel completely at ease with one another anymore. Life has taken us down different paths, and we have grown apart. Maybe one day, we will be close again. I mentioned that I now live on the West Coast, not far from the Pacific Ocean, and I have a life that I really enjoy. During our meal, Sparrow asked about our father's estate. I told him that we can't settle it until Dad's lawsuit against the state is done because Dad set it up like that in his will. I thought about asking my father's lawyer if my sisters could challenge the will. "What does that mean?" Sparrow asked. I explained that Dad always felt wronged, so he planned to sue as soon as he could. At the time he passed, he was in the middle of his appeal hearings. In his will, he wrote that if anything happened to him, the lawsuit should go ahead. Since he died in an accident, the lawsuit has changed to a wrongful death case against everyone involved. "That could take years," Sparrow said. I said, "That's why I'm coming back to take over Grandpa's farm. Grandpa is the executor of Dad's will, so his time will be busy with lawyers and court matters." "Who do you think the estate will be suing?" Sparrow asked. "I don't know," I replied. If I were the one making the decisions, I would include everyone who was involved in his life before the accident. Nicole smiled because she knew the estate matter was almost finished, and I didn't want anyone to know that. Sparrow and I started a good talk about what I planned to do with the land. I mentioned that I wanted to go organic, which opened up many possibilities. One of her friends pointed out that grass-fed beef sold for a lot more money. What many didn't know was that beef was usually raised on grass, but then fed grain for the last 6 weeks before they were sent to be processed. This was done to make the meat softer. It felt like just a trick to get more money from buyers. Sparrow said that by the end of our talk, she could see how much I had changed. She said, "Daniel, I hope we can rebuild our friendship if you want to." She told me that I was so different now that she barely recognized me. I used to be carefree, but now I seemed more serious. She noticed it in my voice. "You remind me of Dad, but you're not exactly the same." She understood that losing trust in someone changes how you view things. I agreed, saying that it changes everything. Thinking back to our father's trial, I realized how close it could have been for me. I see his last few years like a poker game where he had no chance to win. Since then, I've become more careful. Now, people have to earn my trust before I let them in. Sparrow got quiet because it made her think about why I had left. Her friends sensed the tension and tried to change the topic. The letter I wrote when I left was very honest and straightforward, which made everything harder. Sparrow reminded me of how I felt back then, making me realize the strong message I had been sending. It also showed her that what we once had could not return. She was surprised when I told our waiter I would pay for their meal. As we walked out, Nicole said she understood what I was trying to say. She knows that her mother and sister can no longer be trusted by me. That's why she suddenly got quiet. "Do you think she knows her father's trial was retried?" "He passed away the weekend it was won." "I doubt it. Unless it was in the newspaper, no one would know." I said that what I wanted to share has been done quite softly. Soon, all 3 will hear about a lawsuit. They just don't realize it includes them. "Daniel, make sure to remind me that you can think clearly, even during casual talks." Nicole asked why. I answered that it helps you see past the nonsense that most of us waste our breath on. Nicole said few people can notice the truth before most others do, which makes you a natural leader, not a follower. The woman who wins your heart will have a wonderful and fulfilling life. After dinner, Nicole and I decided to catch a movie. Then we went to a Dairy Queen to share a big banana split. We sat across from each other, starting to get to know one another better. Two of her friends from that first night I was back in town walked in. The first thing they saw was us feeding each other some dessert. Nicole smiled widely when one of them said, "Wow, she wasn't kidding about him. It seems those two have a past." "Sue Ellen, you're right," Nicole called out. "Daniel and I have liked each other for years." When he returned, we were both excited to see what might happen next. "Get your orders and join us," I said. "No thanks," replied Sue Ellen. "We don't want to interrupt your first date." "It's fine," Nicole said. "Daniel and I spent all day together yesterday." Daniel is Eric's cousin, and we were with his family. When Nicole's friend looked curious, I added, "Eric is looking forward to seeing where Nicole and I go in our relationship. He's also warned me about some challenges because of our big families." That was all it took. As soon as they picked up their food from the counter, they came over to join us. I moved a little so I could sit next to Nicole. "Sue Ellen, Candace, let me introduce you to Daniel Thompson, Sparrow's brother," Nicole said as they set down their trays. Sue Ellen's eyes lit up with curiosity as she joked, "Wow, the two people who have liked each other for years are finally getting together. No wonder you seemed so happy when you returned to our table. Daniel, did she tell you the only reason she was friends with Sparrow was to be near you?" "Really?" I said, smiling. "I can't wait to tease her about that." "Candace, could you please take a couple of pictures of us with my phone?" I asked. She happily agreed, and we took our first pictures together. They asked how soon I thought I would move back. I answered, "Not too long. If I decide to let a management team run my sixplex, it could be a few months. If I choose to sell it, that's another story." Nicole's friends were surprised that I was already doing well. This led me to share what I had been up to since I moved away. As we headed back to Nicole's parents' house, she looked at me and said, "You must have been very determined to do what you did." "I chose Washington State because people here think differently. I thought the police would not look for me. By chance, I found a small, cheap, one-room place to live and got a job. In my first week, everything I needed was within 3 city blocks. I made sure to keep a low profile from then on. I told her that my landlord liked me because I always did things to stay out of trouble. She helped me with my electricity and heating, allowing me to use a little hot plate for cooking. When I turned 18, I worked hard for my GED and then got into university. At first, I planned to move to Canada, but helping someone changed my path in life. The money I saved to move to Canada ended up being my down payment on a small apartment building and paid for the car I drive. I still can't believe it took so much self-control to get this far," Nicole said. "I thanked my father for that. He taught me to resist my wants at the start, saying it would be easier to use other people's money once I had a stable life." The small apartment building cost around $300,000. I live in one 2-bedroom unit and rent out the other 5. After paying the mortgage and other costs, I still bring in extra money. In the 3 years I've owned it, I have replaced my down payment with the value of the building materials. Its worth has gone way up. If I sold it, I wouldn't have to pay taxes on the money I make. If I decide to keep it, I'll need to get it reappraised to see how much it's worth now. Any increase in value after that will be taxed. He not only showed me why I should save, but also how to use money to make more money. Nicole summarized that he gave you tools that many people will never understand. "How do your grandparents feel about it?" "They really questioned me about my choices in life. They were tough on me for leaving. Even though they get why I did it, I told them. Still, they seem proud of how everything turned out. You should be proud too. Since you turned 21 a few months ago and you're doing better than your old friends," Nicole said, "your life has prepared you for any challenges ahead. It has shown me that worrying doesn't help because you can find a way to get through anything. If you get ready for surprises and accept the results, you can handle them." By this time, we had reached her parents' house, which was dark except for the light at the front door. I walked her to the door to make sure she got in safely before giving her a few goodnight kisses. What we didn't know was that her mother was waiting in the kitchen, ready to ask her many questions about her date. My granddad took me to my father's lawyer. After hearing our story, the lawyer contacted Prudential Life Insurance Company about my father's policy. They had canceled the policy for not making payments after his death. He quickly sent them a copy of the death certificate to show they were responsible for the $4 million. Once that was sorted, we started to show him the timeline I had put together, which showed the behavior that led to my father's passing. I explained in detail what I thought we could do with this information. I made it clear that I wanted to sue everyone involved for my father's accidental death. Mr. Carson Visage looked it over closely before replying. "Daniel," he said, "to be honest, this case is too big for me to handle if we decide to move forward. I don't think it's because I lack knowledge, but I believe we need someone who knows how to work with the state. I feel like I would be lost without that help, and it would put us at a disadvantage right from the start. Would you be open to joining me as a partner if we manage to convince someone else to join in?" I asked. "From what you've shown me so far, it looks promising, but anyone we talk to will want to see much more before they consider it." "Who do you have in mind?" Carson asked. I mentioned the asset recovery team at the insurance company, especially since we received the settlement after my father passed away. I believe they will want to help since they have something to gain. The state might try to delay things as long as they can, so it could be a tough sell. But I think it's worth a shot, he said with a smile. "Now I get why you want to file this under your father's estate. I will keep the copy you made, but I need you to check everything against the documents you used. The court will want to see the originals when we go to court. After we leave here, I'm heading to the courthouse to get a copy of the trial transcript, and I'll stop by the state capitol on my way home for the appeal documents." I mentioned that I would transfer it from my home in Bellingham the next day, including scanned copies of the originals. By the time we're ready to file, I should be all moved into my grandfather's place. After that, we shook hands and said goodbye. Before we left, Dad's lawyer mentioned he would recommend that we ask for court costs in this case. When I spoke to the insurance company, I suggested that they keep the first $2 million if we win. "That sounds good to us," I replied. "Neither of us is doing this for the money. If we don't succeed, I will personally cover your expenses." We had just left the courthouse after paying to have documents mailed to me when my granddad got a call from my grandmother. My mother had found out that I was back in town and wanted to meet with me. I asked my granddad where would be the best quiet but public place for us to meet. He suggested Jackson City Park at sunset since most people would be leaving then. Back at the farm, I called my mother and we agreed to meet at 7:30 that evening. I also called Nicole to plan to see her after my meeting with my mother. It had been about 5 years since we last saw each other, and I think things didn't go as my mother expected. By the time we said goodbye, she saw me very differently. The meeting started with her asking about my father's will. I told her I couldn't discuss it until the court case was over. I was surprised she didn't know about it. She wanted to know what I was doing with my life. I told her it wasn't her concern since I had chosen to be independent the day I left. "Daniel," she said, trying to get me to share more. I told her I didn't expect things to turn out this way when her marriage began to fall apart. I just wanted to take control of my own life during that time. "Mom," I said, "I remember everything about that night. I heard Sparrow and Wren talk to you about your affair because I was sitting on the stairs, listening and writing it all down. It became a daily journal of everything happening in our lives until I ran away." My mother's face changed when she realized that I knew the truth. I continued, saying that I believed my father didn't have a fair chance and that she was taking everything from him that mattered. "I saw how easy it was for you to influence my sisters to follow your wishes. There are rumors that you might try to do it again with your new husband. I'm not sure if they are true, but based on what you've done in the past, I can believe they are." I wanted to say Daniel, but I stopped myself and told her that this talk was over because I am not ready to forgive any of you for what your actions have caused. With that, I left her sitting at the picnic table and walked back to my car. To this day, I wonder if my mother was surprised by my words, or if it was the first time someone was holding her accountable. To me, the conversation went well. I did not know at the time that a short talk with my mother, whom I no longer respected, would start many small fights with her family, who all think I should forgive and forget. Each time I ended it by saying, if she could do it to my father, she could do it to someone else. Thanks for your interest. But because of her past actions, it's best that she stays away from me for my own safety. Nicole texted me while I was driving to her place, telling me that her parents wanted to meet me. I was ready for their questions, expecting them to be intense. Like any concerned parents, they had things they wanted to know, and I answered honestly, hoping to ease their minds. Her father listened as I shared what I had done while I was away. He was impressed by my progress over the last 5 years, especially since they knew about my father's trial. I told them what I had learned since coming home. They did not know that my father had won his appeal or that I was starting a case because of his accidental death. As Nicole and I were leaving, her parents thanked me for being polite and said they were looking forward to getting to know me better. As soon as we got in the car, Nicole smiled and said, "Thank you, Dad. You really impressed my parents. By just being yourself, you showed them how mature you are. They didn't know that you had won your case, and I hadn't mentioned that you were taking action against everyone involved. I realized that if I wanted to win their trust, I needed to be honest. I felt I could trust them because I trust you," I said. "Usually, I wait for people to show me they can be trusted before I open up. Even then, I'm careful. Most parents act this way when their children introduce someone new." "Dad says that his grandfather and great-grandfather were like this too," Nicole shared. "The friends they made found them to be very loyal. I think Dad sees something of them in you. That's why he won't have a problem with Mom after the questions she asked me the other night. I believe a lot of her worries eased tonight when you spoke and confirmed what I'd been saying. There is a joy that comes when someone else backs up what you've said. I explained that most people will believe it until proven wrong." As we drove towards New City Jack's, which had been updated and remodeled recently, I shared what had happened that day. "Will you ever give your mom and sisters another chance?" Nicole asked. I replied, "Maybe one day, but only after the case is settled. I've seen a lot in Seattle. The leaders there have done things over the past few years that hurt the community while pretending to care about the people. Their words say one thing, but their actions show something different. It's disappointing because everyone can see what's wrong, yet people still vote for the same type of leadership. It makes me feel like, as a group, people often do things that make life harder for themselves." Nicole stayed quiet for a little while, but when I parked the car, she finally spoke up. "Your words made me think about a few things, especially my relationship with your sisters. Why didn't I notice it before?" I wondered. "When you see the same thing every day, it becomes just part of life and you accept it. But that doesn't mean what they're doing is right. We often ignore it because it doesn't seem important enough. Until your mom and sister face the truth, you won't be able to move on." Nicole was watching for 2 reasons. The first is what I just explained. The second is that by moving ahead, I want to make sure my dad gets the last say. I mentioned that this would surprise my mom when she realizes she doesn't have the final word. Nicole picked up on my joking tone and laughed a bit. New City Jack's was quite a place now. It had changed from a student hangout to a spot that felt very trendy. In the lobby, you could choose to go left or right, depending on which band was playing. The layout was interesting. The 2 bars faced each other with swinging doors in between. It seemed soundproof because you couldn't hear the band on one side from the other. Thankfully, Nicole chose to listen to a tribute band playing music by Boston since it was one of her mom's favorites. She quickly found out that I didn't know how to dance. We had a fun few hours trying to figure it out together. After spending a couple of hours with Nicole on Thursday night, I left the farm early Friday morning. I had an appointment with the investigators my dad hired from St. Louis at 9 o'clock. I had printed out everything I could find about Judge Fiona Roselli online. The buyer was supposed to share any information they had. They told me they would start by getting the state's copy of the marriage certificate to use his legal name. Then the search for him would begin. After hearing their fees, I left a deposit of $5,000. Next, I headed over to the courthouse in St. Louis to order a copy of my father's appeal papers. On Sunday afternoon, just after noon, I returned to my apartment. I enjoyed the drive back home more because I felt more content with my life. I had done what I needed to do and had reconnected with the people who still mattered to me. The lessons I learned from going home changed how I viewed some things and helped clear up doubts I had. I felt good about the choices I had made for myself. For now, it was time to get back to my daily routine until I was ready for the next big steps in my life. Nicole and I talked for hours as I drove the highway back to Bellingham. I think we learned more about each other than we had expected. We shared personal stories, which helped us understand each other's views. The small things we discovered about one another brought us closer. We were starting to connect. The honest conversations we had that weekend really deepened our bond. By the end of our talks, we agreed that we would find a way to be together no matter what. It was a long weekend. As I drove into Bellingham, I realized how much my vacation had changed me. For the first time in my young adult life, I had to think about someone else's needs when making decisions, because I finally had what I felt was a true girlfriend whom I could trust. One positive thing was that I felt I had found a new purpose and direction in my life, and I was excited about it. Getting my MBA would be a nice surprise, adding to the skills I would need for my new plans. I owed a lot to my father for setting me up for a good life with what he left me. I had dreams and chances that filled me with joy. The first stop when I got back to Bellingham was the photo department at Walmart. I chose 6 of my favorite pictures from my phone and got them printed as 8x10 photos. I then found frames for them. One of my favorite pictures was of Nicole at the welcome home party. It was taken right after she jumped into the pond to cool off, and I thought it captured her in a fun moment. Using editing software, they enhanced her photo so that some details stood out more than in the original. That Sunday evening, a few friends came over to welcome me home. We enjoyed some pizza and beer together. Once most of them went home, only Briley and I stayed behind. Riley Soon is a second-generation Korean-American whose grandparents came to the U.S. during the Korean War. She was studying full-time at university, working hard to earn her degree in science. Riley was smart and had a wonderful mind, but was also able to talk with anyone, no matter their level of understanding. I told her that I believed she would do really well in research and development, but I also reminded her that she should talk to the people who might fund her work using simple words. If she didn't, she might lose their support quickly. I also explained that too often we assume others have knowledge they don't have. She noticed my way of speaking to women. Daniel Bryce started the conversation. He said something had changed in me while I was away. I didn't see it myself, but he claimed I had changed more than I knew. A good sign was that we were sitting alone in my apartment, which had never happened before. You seem more at ease with yourself. Want to share what happened while you were gone? There's a calmness to you that I've never seen, he said. What made you drop your guard that you usually show around others? Choosing not to answer, I went upstairs to my bedroom. I got some pictures I had printed earlier and brought them down. I handed them to her and said, I knew her before I moved. Take your time looking through the pictures. She started with the one of Nicole and me at Dairy Queen. She looked at it closely before saying, She's a nice-looking woman. You both seem really comfortable together. What's the story? I replied, We grew up near each other and reconnected when I returned home. She was close to my 2 sisters until they started working with our mother, which changed everything for us. So, what's her name? Or will you just keep everything a secret? She asked with a laugh. Her name is Nicole Press, and she's 24. I had a big crush on her when I was a teenager, I said. I often found that she was the one keeping things steady between my sisters and me. She was like a calm spot in the chaos we always seemed to create. Honestly, she was very different from my mother and sisters. I never understood why she was friends with them since she was everything they weren't. My grandmother always said she had a kind heart. What I didn't know then was that she felt the same about me. One day, I noticed her looking at me as if she was seeing me for the first time. Then it seemed like she was thinking through something. Finally, she said, I understand now. You're feeling the excitement of falling in love for the first time. You trust her, and you're not afraid to start a new relationship. She told me that this feeling had helped you open up and let go of some of the heaviness you always carry. I sat there amazed at how she was able to express what I felt in a way that made perfect sense. We ended up having a long talk about the important moments from my trip home. Then Bryce said, Your family situation is quite complicated, but I'm sure you'll find a way to handle it. Just don't let the lawsuit take over your life. It might cost you more than you think. Don't let your family issues affect the new friendships you are making. Sometimes it feels like you need to fix things emotionally, but even if you do, it might not give you the happiness you expect. Her honest words led to another discussion about how I see people in general. It was past midnight by the time she was ready to leave. Just before she went, she said, In your relationship with Nicole, remember that being open with her is what has brought you this far. So don't let your family matters ruin that. For the first time, you made me feel like you were truly sharing your thoughts with me. This helped bring our friendship closer. Riley's words kept running through my mind, making it hard for me to sleep. She was right. Usually, I kept my feelings inside. I realized that because of my past experiences, I had trouble trusting others completely. The next morning, I went to the store. The first thing I did was tell the shipping and receiving department to expect some delivery of important documents for me. They asked if the packages would have my name on them, and I confirmed they would, along with my address. Then, I began to go over what had happened while I was away to prepare for the work week. I was frustrated that the new promotion signs were not up yet, so I needed to take care of that. I usually start my work week with a casual meeting with the 4 mechanics, 2 apprentices, and the sales staff on the day shift to discuss our priorities. They noticed that I seemed more relaxed than usual, which was different for them. As soon as we opened the doors, the phones started ringing. That meant it would be a very busy day ahead. The latest flyer in the weekend newspaper had drawn attention to the tires we had on sale. This meant that with each tire sale, we would check if the cars needed a wheel alignment. We also checked the braking systems. By suggesting additional services, we were able to boost our productivity and help our customers avoid bigger costs later on. As a result, our department was doing much better than expected in sales this quarter. We were one of the few shops in Bellingham that still had a full service bay after 6 p.m. When I finally decided to take my lunch break, we were already fully booked for the rest of the week. This break gave me time to check that we had enough basic supplies, so nothing would slow us down. Prices were based on how long the book said a job would take, so many workers often fit in a few small tasks to make more money for the day. Everyone knew that if they did not follow the rules to save time and it caused a problem, they could be let go. It was around 10:30 when my notification rang, surprising me. I looked at it and saw a text from Nicole. It said, "Looks like someone saw us together. Raymond's wife called asking about what I was doing with you when I should have been with Eric." I replied, "Not surprised. Busy at work? We'll talk once I'm home." It was about 3 that afternoon when I finally had a moment to take a break. I went to the restaurant to grab one of their hot dogs and a coffee. I had just found a seat after getting my order when the store manager saw me. After finishing his task, he came over to join me. "I see it didn't take you long to get things sorted out in your department," he said, sitting down across from me. "Did your trip back home go better than you expected?" "Yes and no," I replied. "It's complicated because of the legal issues my father's passing has caused. It's going to take time as everything goes through the court system." "Other than that, did things turn out well?" he asked. "Let me put it this way," I said. "Everyone knows where I stand now. They may not like it, but at least things are clearer." "Why do I see a smile on your face that I don't often see?" he asked with a laugh, as if he noticed something good in me. "Something positive must have happened," he continued. I replied, "I got to catch up with some old friends while I was home. They made my visit enjoyable. Plus, I'll be getting the family farm once everything is settled." "I don't know much about farming, but I think you could make a good living if you wanted to," he said. I replied, "I know a little, but I didn't want to share everything. I spent my summers at my grandfather's farm, helping out until I was old enough to work for my father at his tractor dealership." "I didn't even know Dad bought the farm when Grandpa retired," I added. "So, what's next for you?" he asked. "In my free time, I'll be organizing all the documents for my father's lawyer before we go to court," I said. "We can't settle the estate until this civil case is over." "I need to talk to you about something," I continued. "I met someone while I was home. We'd like to see each other on long weekends when we can." He replied, "If it was anyone else asking, I would say no right away. But since you were away for 2 weeks and your team did so well, I trust your training paid off. There was no drop in sales during your time off, which is impressive. We'll check your team's schedules to see if they're well covered in the future. I don't think it will be a problem. So, tell me about her." My lunch break lasted longer than half an hour, so I opened my gallery file to show him the pictures I had taken. Charlie Richards seemed to be quite the romantic. He wanted to learn everything about my new girlfriend. Before we finished our chat, I knew that by the end of the night, his wife, Kirsten, would know all about it too. He made me promise that when Nicole came over, I would invite her for dinner so they could satisfy their curiosity. It was about 8 o'clock my time, which was 10 o'clock in Missouri. That's when I finally called Nicole. I learned that my Uncle Raymond's wife, Aunt Joyce, had a tendency to get involved in everyone's business. She thought Nicole was sneaking out to see me behind her son's back. Joyce told Nicole it was time for her and her son to settle down. She was tired of waiting for them to get serious about life. Her biggest worry was that she wanted grandkids as soon as possible. Nicole told me she held back her words because she wanted to tell Aunt Joyce that her eldest son wasn't heterosexual. I reminded her that if she told Joyce the truth about her son, she probably wouldn't believe it anyway. Joyce would just find another way to explain his actions. I also talked about my first day back at work and how I got approval for taking long weekends off. That's when we decided to have Nicole fly to Seattle for the next long weekend. It had been 3 weeks since I got home, and some friends wanted to check on me since they hadn't seen me for a while. Between school and the legal case I was dealing with, I was pretty busy and didn't have much time to hang out. I opened the door while chatting with Nicole and waved my friends inside. When they came in, they saw my computer desk was piled high with papers and legal files. I told Nicole that my friends had just arrived, and she asked me to let them know she couldn't wait to meet them in a few weeks. This led to a lot of questions about what I was working on. I explained that I was slowly putting together a legal case. It took a long time because everything had to be checked twice, and I had to back it up with the right documents. Each paper had to be labeled so it would be easy to find when we showed the case to others. Sometimes this meant a lot of extra work because I found new information that could help my case. Riley joked, "That's the excuse Daniel always uses. If we look at his phone records, I bet we would see he has been on the phone a lot, probably with someone special." I laughed and mentioned the time difference and how busy life can get, so I didn't have much time to chat. Riley smiled back quickly and said, "When you feel the way you do, it seems like you have all the time in the world for that special person." He pointed out that everyone was drawn to the new pictures I had placed around my apartment. "Who is she?" Timmy asked. "Where did you meet her?" I replied. "Her name is Nicole. I've known her for years. I was talking to her when I opened the door, and you all will get to meet her when she comes for Labor Day weekend." "Oh my gosh," Timmy's girlfriend Charlene said. "Daniel finally met a girl who really caught his attention." "Come on, Daniel, tell us the story," someone said as I went to make drinks for everyone. I was busy preparing whiskey sours when Charlene chimed in. "She's a pretty girl, Daniel. It looks like she likes you just as much as you like her." It was well past midnight when we decided to call it a night. We all agreed to go whale watching on Sunday while she was visiting because Tim's dad had said we could use one of his boats, as long as we paid for the gas. I answered every question they asked, but the night ended with Charlene and Tim leaving. Charlene joked, "Dan won't admit it, but he's really into her." The sun was setting when I got to SeaTac Airport in Seattle to pick up Nicole. I was in a hurry since I had worked late to prepare for the 3-day weekend I had planned. I promised to bring Nicole with me to my boss's barbecue on Labor Day, but it felt like a lot to manage. As I parked my car and headed inside, I suddenly remembered that I had forgotten the dozen long-stemmed yellow roses I picked up for her. I was too excited to see her and overlooked the small details. When I went back to my car to get the flowers, I worried I would be late meeting her. I thought it was a bad start to our first weekend together. Luckily, her flight was a few minutes late because of some strong winds. When Nicole walked through the gate in a blue jean outfit, she was all smiles and greeted me with warm hugs. After I handed her the flowers, we waited for her luggage to arrive. We talked about her flight from St. Louis and how it felt like time was moving so slowly until she finally got on the plane. I asked her if she had dinner, and I found out she was so excited that she forgot to eat. After we got her bags, I called the Space Needle to see if the restaurant had any tables available. Luckily, they were open until 1, so I made a reservation for us. During our meal, I learned that Nicole was afraid of heights. The restaurant was built in a way that you could look down and see the city lights below. Nicole was okay as long as she didn't look down, and she really enjoyed the view of the lights in the distance. She even took a few nice pictures, saying it was a hobby of hers, and she hoped to sell her photos one day. On the way back to my apartment, we talked about what was happening back home. It seemed that news had spread about me moving back to run my grandfather's farm. My mother and sisters were a bit suspicious. They thought I must have some plan since of how things had been between us. My Aunt Joyce was now insisting that Nicole and her son Eric let everyone know what their feelings were. Nicole wasn't sure, but Eric mentioned visiting his great-uncle in California because he felt he would be accepted there. I told Nicole that my grandmother knew about both of her brothers and Eric's feelings. I smiled when Nicole said she suspected this all along. That's why she was helping with the plan for us when I came back. She wanted to support our possible relationship because she praised you just like I did. It seems my grandmother is doing her usual matchmaking. I joked that the only child she didn't match up was my father. It looked like my grandmother's thoughts were right because she wasn't supportive of their relationship. On the drive back to Bellingham, I shared my plans for her visit, and she seemed really excited about going whale watching. Nicole looked surprised when I parked in front of my apartment building. The building had 6 apartments, each with 2 floors, lined up in a row. On the first floor, there was a living room, kitchen, dining area, and a small bathroom. The second floor had 2 bedrooms, a regular bathroom, and a spot for the washer and dryer. When I first saw the place, the real estate agent said all the apartments came with appliances, but one tenant told me they needed to bring their own washer and dryer. After I moved in, I found out the previous owner had misled her about that. The lights from my car lit up the white wooden siding and black trim. I explained that each pair of apartments was just a mirror image of the other. Each wall was soundproof to create more privacy. Nicole seemed impressed that each unit had its own backyard. I carried Nicole's luggage to the guest bedroom, which I had already set up for her. "Looks like you're planning for the future," Nicole said with a smile. "But I should tell you what my mother gave me before my flight from Cape." I looked at her, curious as I placed her luggage at the foot of the bed. She handed me some medicine for emergencies. "Looks like you'll be bringing these back with you," she said. I replied, "When I get married, I don't want anyone questioning if it was planned." My oldest sister was born 6 months after our parents tied the knot. We've always wondered if they truly loved each other when they got married, or if they just did it because of the situation they were in. I was surprised by Nicole's reaction. I thought she already understood that. "I thought you knew," I said. "Honestly, I knew when your parents' anniversary was. But I never thought about it clearly since I didn't know the year they got married," Nicole said. "I understand what you mean. I would love to return their trust to my mom because she wasn't happy when I came at first. Most people don't like being proven wrong. When you talk to her, tell her you believe she trusted you but was unsure about me. She wanted you ready in case I was not good for you. I said this way, we can build trust." Nicole laughed and said her mom is always worried I might have a bad influence on her. To her, my taking this trip only proved her point. Some of the people I hung out with, she thinks, are not good because of their parents. My dad told her that I chose a tough path when I left home but made something good out of it. In his eyes, I deserved a chance. So he accepted our relationship. I watched a movie about a dad looking for his daughter who got mixed up with bad company. I told her that by the end, he found his daughter, but the person I watched it with and I talked about whether she would go back with him. We had different opinions because we understood her actions and feelings in different ways. Nicole paused for a moment as if thinking hard. Then she said, "This little thing shows how our thoughts can be so different when we see things from all angles before making a judgment." I explained that it takes time to really understand someone's true behavior, and that needs careful attention. But that's something most people think isn't worth it. After saying goodnight, I went down to lock up the place before heading back to my bedroom. On that Saturday morning, I was sitting at my computer desk, working on some files. I was getting ready for my meeting with the lawyer. The system I made for labeling documents was similar to one you might find in a library. It had been 6 weeks since I returned from my trip home. Since then, my schoolwork had taken up most of my focus. When I heard Nicole moving around, I paused to turn on the coffee pot and watched her come into the kitchen for the first time. She had just woken up, and I knew I would always remember this moment. Seeing her in pajamas and slippers showed how relaxed she was. I, on the other hand, was already dressed and ready to start my day. I poured us each a cup of coffee and asked her if she liked the idea of having sausage, pan-fried potatoes, and a 3-egg omelet for breakfast. She smiled and said yes, promising to help make it once she finished her first coffee at the Nook. I took some leftover cold potatoes from the fridge and started cutting them up to fry in butter using the cast iron pan. At the same time, I grabbed 6 eggs from the fridge and placed them in a bowl to warm them up for cooking. Nicole noticed my computer was on and asked, "What are you working on, if you don't mind me asking?" I explained that I was writing a timeline of events related to my father's accidental death. I added, "If you promise not to accidentally delete anything, feel free to take a look." Nicole moved to my desk, opened the document, and began reading from the start. As I worked on the vegetables for our omelets, I took out a small cookie sheet and placed 4 frozen cheese biscuits on it to cook in the air fryer, which I had set to preheat. Nicole was so focused on her studies that I surprised her when I said, "Breakfast is ready." It was time to enjoy the omelets she loved. I made them with cheddar cheese, bits of red and green peppers, onions, bacon, and small pieces of cooked ham. They were fluffy and light, almost like magic. I added a little baking soda while mixing, which helped them puff up while cooking. I also warmed some medium salsa on the side if she wanted to add it. The 8 sausage links were bigger than usual because they were made by a local butcher with his special mix of spices. Nicole said they tasted better than store-bought versions. The homemade hash browns were crispy and golden, covered in butter. I made so much that we couldn't finish it all. While reading what you wrote, I was surprised that I didn't see it myself, Nicole said. "But why didn't your dad believe you at first?" I thought about that for a while, too. I think it's because we expect a lot from those we love. We view them as family. What they were trying to achieve seemed impossible to my dad, and he only saw reasons to doubt it until it was proven real. He held on to his beliefs because he had uncertainties. "I understand," Nicole replied. "We all believe in what we think we know. I get why Eric is thinking of moving away. If he came out to our family, some would not believe him. Others might claim I forced him to change, and some would say they knew all along. Sadly, people may never truly understand why someone is the way they are. When you start to realize that most people only believe what they want to believe, no matter what the truth is, you see how little real truth there is in what I said. This is why I often take what people say lightly. Until they show me they mean it, their words don't matter much to me. If Eric chooses to move to California, you should have a big breakup in front of his parents. This way, everyone can say he left because he was heartbroken. This also explains why some of your family thought you seemed distant at the family welcome home party. Nicole mentioned this. Your grandmother said it was because you had changed over time, but now I think, based on what you've shared and what I've read, that you learned a life lesson before you ran away. That lesson made you less open. I'm going to text Eric about your idea because it makes everything neater and easier while helping him keep his friendships. So, what do you want to do today? If you're up for it, I thought we could go on a 4-hour bike ride on Galbraith Mountain. I found a beginner's tour for us since it will be new for both of us. It will show us beautiful views of Bellingham Bay, the tall mountains, the green rainforests, and maybe some animals if we leave at 9. We should be back in town by around 4. When we're done, I think we'll need a little break. I was thinking we could check out some local museums after dinner. Tomorrow, a bunch of my friends will join us as we head out on the Pacific Ocean for some whale watching and maybe some saltwater fishing, I told her. I hope we can catch enough salmon to have a nice fish meal on one of the smaller islands before we head back. It will give you a chance to see the coast in a new way. Hopefully, we will be back in time to buy some fresh king crabs to cook for a big meal before we finish our day. I'm glad I came ready for anything, Nicole said with a smile. I even brought my nice camera to take some pictures to show what we did. I can't wait to enjoy some seafood fresh from the ocean. If it were spring, I would have taken you out when the herring were running so you could try the fish eggs without spending a lot at a fancy shop or restaurant. I said we could catch them by setting up big nets along the shore where they gather. It's quite a sight during that season. The big ships from Japan line up to pay good money for the catch brought in by the trawlers with huge nets. The First Nations people place cedar branches along the shore where the herring leave their eggs. They collect the eggs and cook them in big pots of boiling water right by the beach. They're actually quite tasty when covered in butter and sprinkled with salt and pepper, I explained. That's one of the great experiences I've had while being by the coast. I've discovered things I would never have tried if I were still at home. I think my comment surprised Nicole, so I added, It's like how ham hocks and white beans are special to us in the South. Timmy is First Nation and one of my best friends. Because of him, I have learned a lot about their culture. It was wonderful to see how the beauty of the Northwest amazed Nicole. Some of the photos she took were fantastic. I found her photography style unique because she captured images in ways I had never seen before. The angles she chose gave life to the pictures, showing scenes that went unnoticed by the naked eye. After taking a few photos, she would show them to me on the camera's screen. The tour we took was meant for beginners, and I have to say it wore me out because I hadn't been on a mountain bike in years, while others were more experienced. As a couple, we looked pretty good together. On our way back to my car, Nicole said, "It's too bad that with all the pictures I have taken, none can show how amazing it was to see everything for the first time. No photo can catch all the feelings that come with such experiences. You need to see these places in every season." I agreed, realizing I hadn't fully appreciated the beauty of nature before. It felt grand and intricate. It made me think about how some people say there is no creator, yet the earth seems too perfect to be a chance. I had never considered that before, but I had to admit Nicole was right. The view of Bellingham Bay from up high will always be one of my favorite sights. On the drive back, we chatted about the fun we had just had. Nicole was excited about the beautiful landscape and how clean everything was. Most of her family vacations were out of the country, so this kind of trip was new for her. Should I plan a weekend at one of the skiing resorts within a 3 to 4 hour drive? I suggested. I started skiing with some friends once we all got cars. I'm still learning, but we can rent the gear for you if you want to try it. I think I would love to do that since I've never tried skiing before, Nicole said. Does this mean you won't be moving back before the year ends? I shared that I had talked to my grandparents about how long it was taking me to figure everything out. They both think I'm making good progress, but they worry that moving back home would distract me due to constant interruptions. I told them that my family expects me to come home for Thanksgiving, so I suggested that they talk it over with them. This way, we won't disappoint our families. I found out that my sisters are starting to ask about my father's estate. We all agreed that it would be best if I moved back in time to prepare the land for the new growing season. Are you hoping to finish the background work before you go back? Nicole asked. That's the plan, I replied. Then I added, how about a meal where you can try the best seafood from the Pacific? Nicole thought that sounded great, so I took her to a restaurant with a little view of the bay. It was nice to watch her enjoy the fresh seafood that had just been caught that day. I smiled when she said, I can't believe how fresh everything tastes. If we lived here, I would eat this all the time. In Missouri, seafood is usually brought in frozen or raised on farms. I explained that both methods can change the flavor. Farm-raised seafood can sometimes be a bit soft when cooked because it might have parasites, I said. It's similar to a rare steak. People often think the red juice is blood, but it's just tissue that gets released when the meat cooks. Nicole asked our server if she could take some pictures of us while we ate. She agreed and took 3 nice photos with her camera. As we were leaving, I remembered there was a rock and roll concert happening at Elizabeth Park, with local bands playing some popular songs from the past. After stopping at the local 7-Eleven for some drinks and snacks, we drove over to listen to music under the stars. We were ready for a fun surprise. The night turned out to be wonderful. The crowd was cheerful, and the show lasted longer than planned. To celebrate the end of the summer event, they finished with a little fireworks show while the band played a rock version of the national song. Nicole took some great photos of the different bands and how the audience reacted. It was almost 1 a.m. when we parked in front of my place. Nicole looked at me with a tear in her eye and said, I will always remember this day. It showed me a side of you I've never seen before. When you helped the older couple on the bike tour, it really showed how kind you are. Few people see this, she continued. You have a natural patience that I didn't notice before, and it shows in everything you do. It's something I had to learn myself. When I arrived on the West Coast, I was angry about many things I had seen. If it hadn't been for Timmy, who showed me their way of life and what matters to them, I would be a different person. I added, I didn't realize they had a special connection to the environment around them. It's a guide in their lives. We each had a glass of wine and shared a sweet moment before calling it a night. On Saturday morning, we went to Squalid Harbor, located at the bottom of downtown Bellingham. It was a large area with over 1,400 boats. On one side were the commercial boats, fully equipped for fishing, and on the other side were the pleasure boats. Nicole was amazed by what she saw. There were crab cages piled high, and the big fishing ships she had seen on TV made her work her camera non-stop. We spent about an hour walking through the Bellingham dockside market. There were many types of seafood available from sea farmers who had been working all night. For Nicole, it was an unforgettable experience. Seeing local fishermen selling their fresh catch right off their boats was a memory she would cherish forever. By the time we finished exploring, the rest of our group was starting to arrive. Since we had agreed to meet at 10, we made our way to Timmy's father's boat. After getting a fishing license for Nicole, we met Timmy's father, who was an elder of the Lummi Nation. He ran a fleet of nice boats that offered day tours for whale watching and sport fishing in the Pacific Northwest. Each boat had a crew of 4 and all the gear we would need. He also served on the board for the Northwest Indian College and helped run a big hotel and casino on the reservation. Nicole was surprised when we reached the big boat. The crew greeted us with a huge banner that said, "Welcome to the West Coast, Nicole." After everyone was introduced, the crew took us out from the docks to the area where some whales had been spotted. Suddenly, the Canadian Coast Guard appeared beside us. I had to explain that we had crossed the border and were now in their area. They came to check that we were not fishing in a restricted way. It was exciting to learn that 2 groups of whales had been seen in international waters to the southeast of Victoria. With their permission, Nicole was able to take some pictures of the amazing moment. Meanwhile, Charlene, Briley, and Nicole were starting to bond. I learned that Timmy's older brother had a crush on Briley, but she was so focused on her own dreams that she hadn't noticed yet. I suggested that he start talking to her about his study on how changing sea currents were affecting the coastal areas in the Northwest. Briley was someone who really believed in climate change. Her views felt more like beliefs than facts. You could argue with her for hours and still not change her mind. Once he started talking to her, he realized they shared a common interest. I thought their connection would last until he figured things out for himself. It took us about an hour to get to the area where the whale pods had been spotted. The crew slowed the boat down to be as quiet as possible. This helped because soon we were able to see the whales starting to move around. We were fortunate to see a small group of humpback whales that seemed to be teaching their young some fun tricks. For about half an hour, they put on an amazing show. Nicole must have taken more than 100 photos. Later, she would notice that a few dolphins had joined them. It's wonderful to see someone experience a natural wonder for the first time. Tim pointed out which whales were males and which were females when he could. As soon as we were back in U.S. waters, the crew brought out strong fishing rods. This gave everyone a chance to try deep-sea fishing for the first time. The crew naturally headed to a spot where they thought the Chinook salmon might be running. It took us about 4 hours, but each of us managed to catch at least 1 fish. Most of them were released, but we kept 3 for those who wanted to take one home. It was nice to see Nicole hug everyone before we left the boat. After the boat returned to its dock, Nicole and I went back to Dockside Market. We picked up 3 king crabs and 2 lobsters from the boats that had just arrived. Once we got to my car, we packed the water-filled bags into the cooler. Our next stop was a grocery store so I could buy the things we needed for our side dishes. While we were driving back to my place, Nicole's mother called. I listened to her part of the conversation as I drove. Nicole told me her mother seemed surprised when she shared what we had been doing. Nicole started getting the salad ready. Once I finished cleaning and cutting the salmon, I wrapped some parts in freezer paper to save for later, but I kept a couple of pieces to go with our meal. She watched while I took out 2 big pots and filled them with water, adding the salt we needed. While I waited for the water to boil, I slowly melted some butter. Nicole poured us each a glass of her 2019 Sauvignon Blanc wine from northern Italy. Most people are shocked to see the lobster and crab still alive when they go into the boiling water to cook. Those seeing it for the first time often show surprise on their faces, just like Nicole did. She was amazed at how easily I taught her to get the meat from the seafood, and she loved dipping the freshly cooked seafood into the melted butter. When she asked how I learned to cook seafood, I told her it was from my friends who are First Nation. We were cleaning up after eating more than 8 crabs when my cousin Eric called. I put the call on speaker as soon as I picked up. It appears that my Uncle Raymond and Aunt Joyce found out from Nicole's mother that she was spending time with me. "I'm not surprised, Eric," Nicole said. "My mom thinks your cousin isn't from the right family because of all the trouble with his parents' divorce. She did this on purpose. She's a lot like your mom, who thinks we belong together and is trying to create a situation that will push me to break up with Daniel so we can really focus on each other. I told my parents I agreed to let you come visit, which led to a big family talk, Eric said. When they asked why, I found the courage to finally tell them that, as a friend, you were helping me because I couldn't tell them that their oldest son wasn't straight. By the time I left, Dad was starting to accept this new truth. Mom, though, was not ready. So, thanks to Grandma, I'm getting ready to move to Lodi, California. Her brother has been kind enough to offer me a place to stay until I get settled. Can you use a little money to help with the move? Maybe while you're looking for a new job, I replied. If you need it, I can give it to Nicole to pass it to you. Grandma and I talked a lot about this whole situation while we were cleaning out the third floor to get it ready for remodeling. I'm not sure how she found out, but with her help, I reached out to Home Depot's HR about a possible transfer. Because of that, I've been downsizing my things. What I have left will fit into a U-Haul trailer that I can tow with my truck. They sent my details around, and based on my skills and recommendations, one of their team members offered me a position that's a step up in my career. I start my new job in 2 weeks. I'm going to send money with Nicole as a gift because I feel a bit responsible for the trouble you're in. I said thanks, but it isn't needed. The truth would have come out eventually. Honestly, I'm glad this is over now. It feels good not to be living a lie anymore. The reason I'm calling is that my dad told me my mom called Nicole's mom. She wanted to know what awful things her daughter did to me that made me the way I am, Eric explained. No matter what anyone says, she won't believe that Nicole had nothing to do with it. When did this happen? Nicole asked. I just left my parents' house because they need time to adjust to this new reality. Dad texted me about what Mom was doing, so I pulled over and called to let you know. I want you both to be ready for what's coming, Eric said. I picked up the trailer on Wednesday and will leave next Saturday. After our call ended, we waited for a call we thought we would get, but it never came. Nicole said, maybe Mom is trying to understand what she has learned before she talks to me. I think when I move back, we should take time to visit my great-uncle and Eric to show our support. I said this because Eric is different from me. He has always leaned on his family. Nicole was quiet for a bit, and I wondered if I had upset her with what I said. But she surprised me by saying, your father taught you to rely on yourself from a young age. Eric, like me, was raised to think family would always be there when we needed them. He's going to feel lost for a while because of the changes in how he relates to his family. His connections with most of them will take some time to sort out. Maybe we should go ahead and do it once we know he's settled in. That explains why you seem so sure in everything you do. I was asked how you managed to do so much while others we know are still figuring things out. It really comes down to our different upbringings. You were better prepared for the responsibilities life brings. I explained that my dad taught me important skills when I was a teenager to help me get ahead in life, but I only understood how special those lessons were when I had to use them. I learned the hard way to let go of some things I once valued because of my journey. In a way, it was a blessing. I no longer measure my worth by the things I own. Today, Nicole said she got to know Timmy a bit better. He mentioned how you both spent hours discussing the connection between people and the earth. He really enjoyed seeing how you embraced their ideas. He realized it wasn't just about an Indian belief system, but a deeper, spiritual connection. I think I should thank my grandfather for that, I replied. He always said that if you took care of the earth, it would take care of you. Timmy helped me understand how important it is to respect nature. I started to see how their traditional practices benefit the land and the area around it. Each January, Cape City does maintenance on the sewage systems. This work generates a lot of clean waste that they have to get rid of at a huge cost. My grandfather used to leave 1/7 of his land untouched for a year, like the practice mentioned in the Old Testament. I have been in touch with the sanitation department. They agreed to spread some sludge in the area we will use. I plan to mix it into the soil before planting clover. This will give the clover more time to clean the soil and add important nutrients. When I was younger, I didn't really understand that we often misuse what we have. I talked about how we call it wear and tear from using things too much. But in truth, we get so busy with our lives that we forget to take care of them. Instead of fixing small issues, we let them grow until they become big problems. Unfortunately, a lot of people treat the earth the same way. Many farmers spend a lot of money on chemicals to try to grow more crops each year, but the results are often unclear. Being young gives me the chance to explore what the earth provides naturally without rushing for quick results. Nicole looked at me with a new understanding. I could see the change in her expression. I realized that our words apply to many relationships. Often people hold back because they don't want to start trouble, but in reality, they are just avoiding the truth. You made me see that by doing this, we are setting ourselves up for bigger problems later by ignoring what's in front of us. We leave issues unresolved, which may come back later. I stepped closer to Nicole and wrapped my arms around her while looking into her eyes. I said, "Let's promise to always feel comfortable enough so that we never have to worry about hurting each other's feelings. It's a good idea, but it will be tough to do." Nicole agreed, saying that we often let things slide because of our love for each other. It's a natural habit we learn over time. This is how things are when you come back home. I could see how much you had changed, but I was still amazed at how you helped me see things in a new way when we were together. I realized that what I thought I knew about you from watching us both grow up had improved. You showed me that you understand what really matters. I appreciate the way you speak openly. It's bringing us closer. We were about to share a sweet moment when your phone started ringing. It was your mom calling. While you answered, Nicole put the call on speaker. "I just spoke to your boyfriend's grandmother," Nicole's mom said. It was an eye-opening conversation. After I told her off for keeping secrets, she really set me straight. I learned a lot about her life because I needed to understand how she knew so much. You must have heard that Eric's mom came to me about your relationship. She was trying to figure out why Eric has changed so much. She hinted that you might have influenced his views. "My husband accepted his sexuality, but I can't," she said. She felt Eric's story was made up because he couldn't handle what your daughter did. "What do you mean?" I asked. She said, "She broke up with him for his cousin." Without Daniel's grandmother's wisdom, that talk would have gone very differently. Now I want to ask you, why didn't you tell me? "Mom, I've known since before we finished elementary school. He confided in me because he needed someone he trusted to explain why he didn't date much when his family started to push him. We decided to have a confusing relationship to keep our friends from asking too many questions. I needed to keep his secrets safe. The good part was that I could date other people too, knowing it wouldn't get serious. It was Eric who helped Daniel and me realize how we really felt about each other when we were younger. Nicole told me that Eric was very clear that we would both be silly if we didn't see if something could grow from our feelings. Eric said he warned Daniel that if he didn't treat me well, he might end up in trouble. There was a quiet moment. I think Nicole's mom was processing everything she learned that day. I was really surprised when she spoke up. She said, "I can't believe how wrong I was. I get why you were so happy when you found out Daniel came back. I thought you were trying to get Eric to do something. What I thought were lies from Daniel when we first met turned out to be true. I learned a lot from his grandmother too. Mom, just so you know, I will return the things you gave me before I left Cape." Nicole shared that Daniel doesn't want anyone to question why he got married, especially since his older sister was born just 6 months after their parents tied the knot. Once again, there was a pause before she continued. "Your grandparents caught us when we were your age. After a very tough conversation, they insisted we marry before anything unexpected happened. We listened to their advice and started planning things, even though we weren't really ready. She asked me to tell Daniel that I realize I was wrong, and I'm now excited to get to know him better." Nicole added, "He doesn't need to worry. I heard everything he said. It's okay to feel uncertain until things are clear. Please help us out. I'm coming home for Thanksgiving. Can you please talk to my grandparents about a schedule so Nicole and I don't upset anyone?" She said yes quickly before hanging up. I think she felt shy. I filled our wine glasses again, thinking Nicole needed a moment to gather her thoughts. Suddenly, she started laughing. Mom didn't worry about what we would do because she believed we would act like they did at our age. She just wanted to make sure we were prepared for anything unexpected. When I get home, I'll tease her about it for weeks. I should be nice to her, though. I think all parents see their kids as a part of themselves and act like it, even if they won't say so. My grandmother mentioned this when I was visiting, giving me a couple of examples. Nicole and I settled on the sofa to watch something on TV. We both found out we weren't fans of reality TV. We didn't want to see people airing their private lives for everyone. Before we left for the day, we loaded her suitcase into the car so we could go to SeaTac Airport for her flight at 5. First, we stopped by the harbor to pick up fresh oysters and clams, then headed to Aurelie and Kristen's place for a Labor Day barbecue. I was surprised to find out the barbecue was only for department heads, their partners, and children, but there were lots of people there. Nicole quickly caught everyone's attention since they had never seen me with a girl before. Kristen and Nicole seemed to hit it off right away. I couldn't help but smile when I heard Aurelie tell her husband that if Bo Derek and Nicole were the same age, Bo would have some tough competition. Soon, we had to say goodbye because I needed to take my girlfriend to the airport. Before that, Nicole learned about how we had met. I made a quick stop to buy a box of smoked salmon for Nicole to take home. It was a bit sad to watch her plane leave. The first full week after Labor Day was when things began to fall into place. I wasn't ready for the day when I got a call from a detective agency in St. Louis. They told me they had the first report on Judge Fiona Roselli and would send me a bill for their work. I said I would look over the report after work and let them know if I needed more research. It was tough to focus because I just wanted to head home the entire day. Once I got back, I turned on my computer and printed out their report. As I read, I became more convinced that my worries were true. Josiah Lopez married Fiona Carmen Roselli in 1994, but they divorced 10 years later because he had vanished. In less than 6 years of marriage, during which they had 3 daughters, he disappeared. Neighbors from that time thought he was a kind man who was always ready to help. In contrast, Fiona seemed very driven and had a lot on her plate. People around them often saw them having loud arguments, which made it clear there were issues in their seemingly perfect life. 3 main points stood out to me. The first thing that stood out was that there had been no tax records filed in the US or Mexico since the year before he went missing. The second point was that after he disappeared, none of his credit or debit cards had been used or canceled. This was a strong hint that something was wrong. It was also noted that there were no signs of large cash withdrawals from any of his accounts. This led people to believe that something unexpected had happened. He grew up in the village of Kopech, a small Catholic town famous for its coffee and many beautiful orchids sold from greenhouses scattered around. The town was known for its old colonial buildings that were kept in good shape. His parents were alive but had handed over the coffee plantation to his 6 siblings. They had no idea where he was either, but they hoped he was alive, thinking they would have heard from him if he wasn't. By the time Fiona and Juan met, he had a successful import-export business focused on coffee beans, which he ran with 2 of his brothers. Their wedding took place in his hometown, following traditional Mexican customs. It was clear that after reporting him missing, Fiona stopped all contact with his family. 6 months later, she sold their house for less than it was worth. To me, that seemed a bit much, and suggested that she wanted to avoid any questions from his family. This also made me wonder if she sold it because she believed he would never come back. At the time he went missing, they were free of debts and owned a few large apartment buildings. It didn't seem like there was a good reason for what his wife suggested had happened. In short, they felt that something else was going on and wanted to look into it more. They found out that Fiona had been in a long-term relationship with another woman who still lived with her. The woman, Tegan Stevens, had started as their nanny and was now a lawyer at a big firm in the capital of Missouri. I kept wondering if she had been their nanny before he went missing. According to her background, she came from Spain with a work visa. She was a friendly person and had identified as not straight while studying in America. It was a judge who helped her become a citizen. I used some money I got from selling some Bitcoin my dad left me to pay their bill and made a deposit for more help I needed. I wanted to find out about Fiona and Tegan's relationship. I also asked them to gather a list of all unidentified bodies of Mexican descent found in the Mississippi River 2 years before and after Juan went missing. They needed to focus on the states the river flowed through, all the way down to the Gulf. I also requested to get blood samples from his family, so if we found a body that looked like him, we could see if it was a match or not. Growing up close to the Mississippi River, I knew that when winter ended and the snow melted, the river could change a lot. My biggest worry was how high and fast the river could rise, flooding the low areas. This extra water could make sandbanks bigger or wash them away. Sometimes people would even find bodies as the river dropped. I felt in my gut that we might be looking for someone who did not die by accident. I wrote an email to the detective agency and another to my father's lawyer. I asked him to buy Fiona's house for me if it was for sale and to see if he could get the original blueprints. I also sent him a file with details about my father's past, asking if it was enough to start moving things along. Just as I was thinking about dinner, my phone started ringing. It was Nicole. She told me that Wren, Sparrow, and my mom had stopped by her work. They heard from Nicole's mom that we were in a serious relationship. The talk didn't go well. Nicole made it clear that our relationship was private. They seemed worried about something. Nicole said that Wren was trying to use some old tricks we had learned as teens, ways to find out information without asking directly. Waiting for something to happen can be really frustrating for most people. I mentioned that not knowing what is in my father's will, apart from his lawsuit against the state, is probably making my family wonder how much money my sisters will get when it's all settled. "Do you think it's that simple?" Nicole asked. I shook my head and replied, "No. Knowing my family like I do, it seems they want to get to me. They believe the only way to reach me is by making things hard for you." The chief of police in Jackson told me they have been watching my mother's family because they often make money by breaking the law. I then shared what I had learned about the judge in her husband's case. She had suggested that it could be a great one-hour show for TV. Little did she know she sparked an idea that might help me share important information. Eric had left for California, trying to escape from the feelings he was dealing with. He thought that staying away would solve the problems he had created. Nicole said he seemed happy and calm, showing a joy for life that she hadn't seen in years. After her visit, Nicole and her mother had a long talk. She felt this conversation brought them closer as they began to understand each other better. I was happy to find out that when they talked about what we did while she visited, Nicole's mom said that I must have put a lot of thought into making our first long weekend together so great. I felt like my mom is starting to accept that Nicole and I are building a strong bond. Nicole mentioned that you could tell how I planned everything and that I didn't mind spending time alone. I was confused by that until I thought it through while showing my parents the pictures I took. Dad seemed impressed by all we accomplished in such a short time. He suggested to Mom that they should explore more of their own area instead of always traveling far away. We talked for about another hour until I realized I should leave because I was really hungry. Nicole laughed and said she forgot about the time difference when she called. I was waiting for my connecting flight from Tennessee to the regional airport in Cape Girardeau. Because of the virus, flights from St. Louis were no longer available since that service had been cut back. I was glad I could still use my employee benefits for travel. I get 4 weeks of vacation each year. This lets me take a whole week off for Thanksgiving to visit home. The best part is that it falls on Nicole's birthday. About a month ago, her mom reached out to me to see if I could be there as a surprise. She thought that since our relationship was growing, it might be special for me to be there for her birthday. Once she had her birthday celebration at home, her mom thought it would be the perfect touch to have me there too. So, with my paid time off, I arranged my schedule to be there when Nicole got home from work to greet her. I knew I needed to say sorry to Nicole for confusing her. She thought I was coming home tomorrow because I had work this Friday. While I waited, I watched the local news on the screen. The midday news was on, and a woman reporter caught my attention. She talked about a lawsuit. My father's life insurance company had just filed a claim against the state of Missouri. I was surprised that they were asking for what seemed like a huge amount of money. I didn't realize they could do that. If we won the case, the judge or jury would have a lot of freedom in deciding how much money to give us. The reporter explained the details of the case and why she thought the family had a strong claim for wrongful death. I felt uneasy because I knew that once the lawsuit was filed, everyone would be notified quickly. 2 hours later, I walked across the runway after getting off a small plane. As I approached the sliding doors to enter Cape Regional Airport, I saw my grandparents waiting for me. After we greeted each other and I got my bags, we drove to the farm. On the way, I found out that while I was gone, the family had finished remodeling the second and third floors of the house. I asked if the money I had given them was enough, and they told me there was still more than half left. Once we got home and settled, my grandmother handed me the keys to their 2004 PT Cruiser. It had just been serviced, and they had bought insurance for it last week. It was mine to use while I was there. "Daniel, we have an appointment with the lawyer on Monday at 9, my grandfather said. "He will bring you up to speed on everything. It looks like what you sent him was enough for the life insurance lawyers to agree to take the case against the state. The terms and conditions will be discussed later." "That's good to know," I said while I waited in Pachuca for my connecting flight. It was mentioned on the local news. Plus, I have 3 discs with important papers to give him. Amazing. They only filed it yesterday because they needed time to notify everyone over the weekend. My grandfather told me to be careful because as soon as they see you after being notified, there might be big problems. I was curious to see what the Saturday morning paper would say. While I thought about this, my grandmother got up to make tea. My grandfather and I looked around the newly renovated floors. The 3rd floor now has its own suite, with a big shower and a soaking tub. The master bedroom was designed with 2 walk-in closets. They turned the 2nd bedroom into an office. On the new oak desk was my father's computer. I noticed that all the windows were updated with the latest designs. They changed 4 bedrooms on the 2nd floor into 3, which allowed for another master bedroom. My grandmother made one of the other bedrooms a space for her sewing and crafts. This change opened up space on the 1st floor, so when they remodeled there, they could have an island in the new kitchen and a bigger living room. That's when I learned that she had asked Nicole for help in choosing the colors for the house, which now matched current trends. It also explained the new LED lights on the upper floors. At 4:30, I started heading to Nicole's parents' house, so I would be there when she got off work. I had no idea that when I arrived, they had made a large cardboard box for me to climb into before they sealed it up. When Nicole's co-worker called to say she was on her way, I got into the box and crouched down, listening to the sounds around me as people talked and wrapped up the box tightly. I never thought I would be in a situation like this. I listened to the chatting until I heard the lights being turned off and the front door locking. It seemed like I waited a long time for Nicole to come in and turn on the lights. Then, I heard a big surprise. Nicole was shocked to see that some of her friends from school were there. After a few minutes, her father spoke up to get everyone's attention. He said, "Since my daughter started dating, I have been worried about when she would get serious with someone. But I'm happy she isn't married yet. So this year, instead of going on a trip for her birthday, we wanted to give her a special gift to help her take the next step in her life." Nicole's father explained that he and her mother hoped she would like it since they knew she had high standards. A few people laughed and made smart comments that I found funny. Then her father asked, "Nicole, what do you need to open the box in the corner?" She replied, "A straight edge to cut the tape would be nice." Her father handed her a large knife. I could hear the sounds in the room as she slowly slid the knife along the top of the box. I wondered if I could trust her not to just push me out of the box. I thought about it but realized I might get hurt in the chaos. It made me think of how a trapped animal feels before it gets used to its space. "She's sure taking her time," I heard one woman say. Another replied, "That's because she doesn't want to harm what's inside." "Maybe she can use this as a hope chest for when she gets married," the first woman said. "I wish the Daniel she talks about at work was here. When I see them together, I will find out if their relationship is real or not." By now, Nicole had cut the tape and was taking off the wrapping. She pulled back the flaps to reveal a large, dark sheet covering whatever was inside. I won't forget the look in her eyes when she pulled off the sheet and saw me without my full beard. I looked so different. I didn't expect her to start crying, but she did as I stood up. Before I could even step out of the box, she was giving me a kiss. "Ladies and gentlemen, the man our daughter keeps kissing is the same one she can't stop talking about," Nicole's mother said. As far as Nicole knew, he wasn't supposed to arrive until tomorrow. "I am very proud to introduce you to her boyfriend, Daniel Thompson," I heard Nicole's brother Hunter say to his girlfriend. "Both Daniel's grandmother and my mom now think they are a perfect pair. His family is behind the lawsuit against the state for wrongful death." I met all of her co-workers and their partners before the birthday girl opened the rest of her gifts. It was a surprise because they had hired a service to set up a buffet table. The food was really good, and people went back for seconds or thirds. Nicole said she liked my goatee and mustache better than my full beard. The older family members made sure to introduce themselves to me. It was almost 10 at night when things started to slow down. Little did we know there were some very upset people across town. Earlier in the evening, my mom and 2 sisters had answered their doors to find they were being served. The married couples gathered to talk about what might happen if their plan worked. At 10 p.m., 3 women and their 2 husbands came to my mother's new home to start making a plan. The main thing on their minds was saving money on legal fees. They decided to share the cost of getting a lawyer together. Thanks for listening to One Infidelity Hit. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop us a like.